The story of Hogwarts begins long before Harry ever set foot in its stone corridors, in a time when the wizarding world was still raw and scattered, when families of magic kept mostly to themselves and learning was passed down through whispers and guarded secrets. There was brilliance in the air, but also danger, for without a place of guidance, young witches and wizards often grew wild in their powers, sometimes feared even by their own kind. And if this quiet telling of the wizarding world brings you a little rest, feel free to stay, perhaps even subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. Share in the comments where you are listening from and what hour is. It feels almost like magic to know that in many corners of the world, others are closing their eyes to the same story, carried together for a moment by the echoes of Harry Potter's world. Now, as sleep settles on you, let us go back 1,000 years to the earliest whispers of Hogwarts. The vision came to life in the Highlands of Scotland, where mists cling to the mountains and lakes, and where the veil between the magical and the ordinary always seemed thin. There, upon a rise of stone and wild earth, the foundations of a school began to be laid. Not a simple hall or tower, but a castle, vast and secret, its stones enchanted to conceal it from those who could not comprehend its wonder. The work itself was a marvel, for each founder wove their power into the walls. Gryffindor with his strength, Ravenclaw with her knowledge, Hufflepuff with her endurance, and Slytherin with his cunning spells of protection. These four did not meet by chance. Their reputations had carried far across Britain, whispered in halls and cottages, their names spoken with admiration or sometimes with unease. Each, in their way, had grown weary of seeing magical children struggle in isolation, feared by neighbors, misunderstood even by their own families. They wanted a place of gathering, of safety, of teaching, a place where the future of the wizarding world might be protected and perhaps improved. It is said that four of the greatest witches and wizards of the age began to dream of something larger than themselves. Godric Gryffindor, bold and steady, saw the need for courage to be cultivated in the young, lest fear weaken them before their time. Helga Hufflepuff, patient and fair, longed for a place where every child of magic could find welcome, regardless of birth or talent. Rowena Ravenclaw, keen and searching, believed wisdom itself could be shaped like clay, given structure in the minds of those willing to learn. And Salazar Slytherin, ambitious and proud, desired above all to preserve strength in the magical bloodline, so that their kind would endure against the encroaching tide of the non-magical world. The founders gathered students in the first years cautiously, often seeking out children themselves, visiting villages and distant farms, inviting those who had shown strange signs of magic. Some families resisted, fearful of letting their children go, but most accepted with gratitude. For the first time, the scattered young witches and wizards of Britain had a home waiting for them. In those days, the castle was smaller than the Hogwarts we know, only a central keep with a few strong halls. But from the start, it bore enchantments that made it extraordinary. Walls shifted to accommodate its builders, staircases grew where there was need, and secret ways opened under whispered command. The lake beside it shimmered with more than mere fish, as early magical creatures were drawn to the protective wards. It was not simply a school, it was alive with their intent. And yet, even in those earliest days, differences stirred beneath the vision. Gryffindor and Hufflepuff believed any child of magic deserved a place within the walls, while Slytherin pressed his view that only those of pure magical descent should be trusted with such learning. Ravenclaw often stood between them, insisting that knowledge itself should be the measure. These debates did not yet divide them, but the tension was planted like a seed in the soil of the new school. In those earliest years, the castle began to grow as the founders envisioned more. A library was started, its shelves already filling with magical texts that had never before been gathered in one place. Dormitories were carved from stone towers, common rooms built to reflect the character of their houses. Gryffindor chose a tall tower to the west, with windows that looked to the horizon. Hufflepuff set her chambers near the kitchens, close to warmth and food, so her students would always be cared for. Ravenclaw raised her rooms high in the eastern tower, where the stars were closest for study. Slytherin, preferring quiet and secrecy, carved his chambers beneath the castle, near the waters of the Great Lake. Still, for the children, it was a wonder. Imagine walking through the vast oak doors for the first time, hearing them creak open on their own. Imagine the long hall, where meals appeared at will, where the ceiling mirrored the sky outside, so that students never forgot the turning of day and night. Picture the flickering torches, the enchanted suits of armor that polished themselves, the echoes of laughter in corridors that stretched on and on. For those who arrived, Hogwarts was more than a school. It was safety, belonging, a place where they were no longer strange. The Sorting Hat itself came into being as the founders realized they would not live forever, and their judgment could not always guide which child belonged where. The hat, once Godric Gryffindor's own, was enchanted with the wisdom and will of them all, so that it might continue to divide students long after the founders were gone. To this day, it carries their voices, echoing the ideals they once held. And so the castle stood, stone upon stone, spell upon spell, the beginning of something that would last through centuries. But within its walls, the disagreements of its makers lingered, quiet for now, yet waiting to rise. As the school settled into its rhythm, legends grew quickly. Students carried home stories of moving staircases and talking portraits, of classes where cauldrons bubbled and brooms lifted into the air. In a land where fear of magic often ran high, Hogwarts became not only a refuge but also a beacon, a reminder that magic had a place to flourish. As the years unfolded, Hogwarts began to breathe with its own rhythm, and among the four who had given it life, Godric Gryffindor stood as a figure whose influence shaped not only the school, but the spirit of the many students who passed through its gates. He was remembered for his courage, but courage to him was not only the readiness for battle or the rush into danger. It was the steady choice to do what was right, even when it was lonely, even when it was feared. He came from the wild moors of Godric's Hollow, a place where magical and non-magical people lived close together, often uneasily. Gryffindor grew up among that tension, seeing the suspicion of Muggles toward magic and the arrogance of some witches and wizards toward those without it. From his earliest years, he believed in bridging divides, meeting strength with kindness as much as with force. Yet when pressed, he could fight fiercely, and his skill with a blade was as well known as his command of spells. He carried a sword of silver, forged by goblins, enchanted so that only the worthy could draw it in times of need. At Hogwarts, Gryffindor's mark was left most deeply in the house that bore his name. His students were chosen not for birth or cleverness, but for the fire in their hearts. He believed the young must learn to face fear, to act with bravery, to speak when silence was easier. Those who entered his house found themselves tested, not only in the classroom but in the challenges of the castle itself. Staircases that shifted without warning, portraits that demanded riddles before opening secret ways, creatures stirring in the forbidden forest that pressed the students to learn courage in practice rather than in story. Gryffindor was not a distant figurehead. He taught lessons that would later be called defense against the dark arts. His lessons were practical, often unsettling, for he believed that students must meet the shadow before the shadow met them. He would release controlled magical creatures in the training halls, forcing pupils to work together to contain or repel them. He would conjure illusions of storms or fire or fears drawn from the students' own minds, then teach them to steady their breath, and to anchor their purpose before raising their wands. To Gryffindor, magic was not only in the spell but in the will that shaped it. Courage in his teaching was never only about fighting. He urged honesty, the admitting of fault, the defense of those unable to defend themselves. Many early traditions of Hogwarts came from him. The feasts where all sat together before division into houses, the practice of standing in silence to honor a fallen classmate, the rule of dueling with restraint instead of blind fury. These lessons were courage as much as kindness, for to him the two were always entwined. His friendship with Helga Hufflepuff was steady and close. When others quarreled, they often found agreement in the belief that Hogwarts must open its doors to every child of magic, regardless of heritage. Gryffindor admired Helga's patience, and she in turn respected his readiness to act when danger was near. Courage and loyalty together gave the school stability in its uncertain early days. Still, Gryffindor's quarrels with Salazar, Slytherin grew sharper as the castle filled with children of every background. Where Slytherin saw risk, Gryffindor saw promise. He argued that bravery could be found in any child, whether born of pure magical blood or not. To deny them, he said, was to weaken the heart of their world. Their debates shook the stone halls, and though their friendship had once been firm, it began to strain. The sword of Gryffindor was more than a weapon. It became a symbol of his house, gleaming with enchantments that let it grow stronger through each trial. His students saw in it proof that courage left its mark, not only on the wielder but on the very tools they held. In time, the sword would vanish and return to the hand of a true Gryffindor called by need in the darkest of hours. Even after centuries, its edge shone as if freshly forged. Stories of Gryffindor filled the first years of Hogwarts. Some spoke of how he defended the school from dark wizards who sought to claim its knowledge, driving them away with both spell and steel. Another tale told of his battle with a troll in the dungeons, where he fought until the beast fell beneath collapsing stone. Whether all of these tales were true mattered less than the example they offered. To his house and to the school, Gryffindor stood as proof that fear could be faced, that strength was not only magic but choice. His students carried his teaching beyond the castle. Some became guardians, some healers, some protectors of their villages. They shared not a common trade, but a common spirit, one shaped by the lessons of their house. To this day, Gryffindor's house is known for producing those who rise when the moment demands it, who stand between the world and the dark that seeks to press in. Yet, beneath the fire of his courage, Gryffindor carried sorrow. He knew the rift between himself and Slytherin was growing, and he feared what it might one day mean for the school they had built. Still, he poured himself into Hogwarts, believing it greater than any one founder. He left behind not only a house but a spirit, a warmth that spread through the castle stones, a courage that would be felt by generations yet to come. While Gryffindor carried the fire of courage into the stone walls of Hogwarts, Helga Hufflepuff carried the quiet warmth of loyalty and kindness. Her legacy was not marked by dramatic battles or shining swords, but by the steady foundation of fairness that allowed the school to endure. If Gryffindor taught that bravery could shape the future, Helga taught that patience and care could hold it together. Helga was born in the broad lands of Wales, where green valleys stretched wide and villages often lived by the work of their hands. She grew among farmers and craftsmen, and though she herself held great magical talent, she never set herself above those without it. To Helga, magic was not a banner of superiority, but a gift to be used in service of others. Her heart was said to be as generous as her magic, for she saw value in every person, no matter how small their skill or simple their beginnings. When the founders came together, Helga's voice often softened the sharp edges of debate. Gryffindor's fiery insistence and Slytherin's fierce pride could clash like storm and thunder, and Ravenclaw's sharp mind could cut like glass. But Helga's words settled like steady rain. She reminded them that a school built only on ambition, bravery, or brilliance would fail, for children needed more than one measure to thrive. They needed a place where they could belong, where kindness was not weakness, and where effort itself was valued. Her house, Hufflepuff, became the home for those who did not always shine in obvious ways. Many who entered her house were steady workers, loyal friends, and quiet souls, children who might have been overlooked by the other founders. Helga believed these students deserved the same chance as any other, for she knew that greatness could emerge from unexpected places. It was she who first said that Hogwarts must take all children of magic, not only those of certain families. For her, blood and birth meant nothing compared to heart and dedication. Her chambers were placed near the kitchens, close to the warmth of fire and food. There her students lived with comfort, tended to by house elves whom Helga welcomed with respect. She was said to be the first witch of her time to openly invite house elves into her service, not as slaves but as partners, giving them a place where they were safe and valued. Her kitchens became a model of care, filled with the scents of bread and soup, laughter of elves, and the knowledge that no student of Hogwarts would ever go hungry while she was there. In her teaching, Helga was steady and practical. She taught herbology with great passion, for she believed plants held healing for body and mind alike. She showed her students how to cultivate gardens that thrived in all seasons, how to brew with patience, how to mend with herbs and charms. Many of the earliest healers of the wizarding world were trained under her watch, carrying her lessons into villages and battles alike. Where others prepared warriors, Helga prepared healers and caretakers. She did not dismiss defense or ambition, but she believed that without compassion, such traits would twist into cruelty. Helga's strength was quiet, but unshakable. Tales speak of times when dark wizards threatened the lands near Hogwarts. Gryffindor would draw his sword. Slytherin would weave cunning wards. Ravenclaw would devise spells of strategy. But Helga would stand among the frightened villagers, calm and kind, and her presence alone gave courage. She fed them, she healed them, she assured them, and in her company even the weakest felt a measure of strength. Some said she could still the fear of a crowd with nothing more than her voice, steady and gentle, like the calm after a storm. Though her house was often seen as modest, Helga herself was far from simple. She was deeply skilled in food charms, enchantments of loyalty, and spells of protection that required immense patience. Some of the wards she laid on Hogwarts were so subtle that centuries later they still functioned quietly, shielding the castle without anyone noticing. She did not seek glory, and perhaps that is why her name is less often spoken in story. Yet her magic runs like an unseen river beneath the foundation of the school. Her loyalty to the other founders was unwavering. Even when disputes grew heated, she argued with Slytherin. Yes, but she never let anger carry her words. She sought to understand, even when she disagreed. When the bond between Gryffindor and Slytherin began to crack, Helga worked tirelessly to hold the school together. She reminded them that Hogwarts was greater than any one vision, that it was meant to be a home, not a battlefield of ideas. Without her presence, the castle might have fallen to division much sooner. The symbol of her house, the badger, was chosen for good reason. At first glance, a badger may seem unassuming, quiet and steady. Yet beneath its humble nature lies determination and ferocity when threatened. Helga believed her students embodied that same balance, capable of loyalty and patience, but ready to stand firm when tested. Generations of Hufflepuffs carried her values into the world. Many became healers, some became teachers, Others became quiet heroes who defended their homes without seeking recognition. In every age of Hogwarts history, when courage and cunning and brilliance were praised, loyalty remained the quiet force that held the school steady, and that legacy began with Helga. Though she is less sung in ballad than Gryffindor or Ravenclaw, and less feared than Slytherin, Helga Hufflepuff's spirit is present in every corner of Hogwarts. It is in the warmth of the kitchens, in the patience of the herb gardens, in the laughter of friends who find safety in each other. More than any spell, she left the school a heart, and without her, its walls would be stone without warmth. If Gryffindor was the fire and Hufflepuff the warmth, then Rowena Ravenclaw was the clear sky above them, sharp and boundless, filled with the light of knowledge and the wonder of thought. Her name is remembered as the mind among the founders, the one who looked at the castle not only as stone and spell, but as an idea, a place where wisdom itself could be given shape and passed from generation to generation. When she joined the other founders, Rowena brought with her the vision of a school that was more than safety, more than bravery, more than loyalty. She saw it as a library of living minds, each student a page in a book that never ended. Her goal was to gather the brightest, those who hungered for knowledge as she did, who felt restless until they uncovered some truth, who dreamed not only of power, but of understanding. Rowena was born in the glens of Scotland, in lands of mist and heather, where old magic lingered in the hills. Her family was known for keen intelligence and for secrets carried in books that few could read. From childhood, she displayed a mind that reached beyond her years, mastering languages, symbols, and spells that other witches studied for decades. It was said that she could solve puzzles faster than they could be posed, and that she saw connections between things others thought separate. To her, magic was not chaos, but a pattern waiting to be understood. Her tower rose high in the east of the castle, with windows that opened to the sky. There students looked out at the stars and the turning of the heavens, a reminder that beyond every answer lay a greater mystery. The entrance to her common room was guarded not by a password but by riddles, a choice that reflected her belief that learning must be earned, that entry into knowledge required thought. To pass into the tower was to prove not only memory but insight. Her house, Ravenclaw, became the home for such students. She valued intelligence, creativity, and wit. Many of her pupils were known to spend long hours in the library or to lose themselves in questions that had no simple answer. She believed that knowledge itself was a kind of magic, one that could endure even when spells faded. Yet she also warned her students that wit without heart could turn cold, and that learning must be balanced with wisdom. Rowena herself taught subjects that blended magic with philosophy. She guided her students through advanced charms, enchantments that required not only skill but deep understanding of the principles behind them. She taught that every spell carried meaning, that the words and gestures were only surface, and that true mastery came from knowing the reasons beneath. She urged them to look beyond the obvious, to see how magic was tied to the world itself, to history, to emotion, to the patterns of nature. Rowena was admired by many, yet she was also feared a little, for her intelligence could cut sharp. When she debated with Slytherin, she did so with precision, dismantling his arguments with calm reason. When she spoke with Gryffindor, she tempered his fire with logic. With Helga, she shared a gentler bond, for she saw in Hufflepuff the heart that softened her own sharp edges. Among the four, she was often the one who could see farthest into the future, not only of Hogwarts, but of the wizarding world itself. It was said she created many of the moving staircases in Hogwarts, enchanted so that students would never grow too comfortable, that their minds would be challenged even in walking from one class to another. She believed that learning should surprise, that comfort dulled the intellect, and so the castle itself became her lesson. In her presence, students were reminded that nothing stayed fixed, that thought must remain alive and questioning. Legends say she wore a diadem, a circlet of silver set with a blue stone, enchanted to increase the wisdom of the wearer. Whether the enchantment truly worked or whether the diadem simply symbolized her ideals, no one can say for certain, but it became her most famous possession, remembered long after her death, and in time twisted into darker history by the hands of another. In her age, though, it shone as a symbol of her house, a reminder that learning itself was a crown, though she valued intellect. Rowena was not without compassion. She cared for her students in her own way, urging them not only to achieve, but to grow as people. She praised not only success, but curiosity. She rewarded those who tried new paths, who dared to think differently. She believed that true intelligence was not in memorizing what was told, but in asking what had not yet been considered. Many of her pupils became inventors, theorists, and creators of spells that reshaped wizarding life. Rowena's vision of Hogwarts was sometimes at odds with the others. She wanted strict standards of learning, believing that the school must be a place of excellence. Helga countered that all deserved a place, even if they were not gifted with sharp minds. Their debates were heated, but respectful, for each saw the value in the other. In the end, it was the balance between them that gave the school its shape, a place where both brilliance and loyalty found room to grow. Her name became tied to wisdom, but it is said that her final years carried sorrow. Some stories speak of a daughter who betrayed her by stealing the diadem and fleeing. Whether this tale is true or not, it reflects the human side of her, for even the wisest may know grief and loss. In the legends of Hogwarts, her story is a reminder that knowledge cannot shield against every wound, that even the brightest minds carry shadows. Still, her legacy endures. Every riddle posed at the entrance to the Ravenclaw Tower, every spell studied with depth rather than surface, every student who gazes at the stars and wonders what lies beyond, all carry her spirit. Rowena Ravenclaw gave Hogwarts its sharpness, its hunger for learning, its restless mind. Without her, the castle would have been a fortress or a hearth, but not a school. She made it a place where thought itself lives, whispering through every corridor. As the years of Hogwarts' first age unfolded, the four founders began to see more clearly that their lives would not stretch far enough to guide the school forever. They were strong, yes, and their magic was deep, but time waits for no witch or wizard. They knew that one day they would be gone, and yet the school must endure. The greatest question was how to ensure that the values of each founder would survive, how the spirit of their houses could live on long after their voices fell silent. The answer came in an object so humble that no one would have thought it possible. A hat, battered and plain, once worn by Godric Gryffindor himself. Upon his head it had sat through duels, through journeys across wild moors, through nights under open sky. To most, it was no more than a piece of clothing. But the founders, in their wisdom, saw it as the vessel for something far greater. Together they wove enchantments, deep and complex, laying upon the hat not only spells but also fragments of themselves. They poured into it their thoughts, their judgment, their voices, so that it might one day choose in their place. Gryffindor gave it the fire of bravery, Hufflepuff gave it the warmth of loyalty, Ravenclaw gave it the sharpness of wit, and Slytherin gave it the cunning of ambition. Their combined magic breathed life into the fabric, and the Sorting Hat was... At first it was strange to the students, for the idea of a talking hat seemed curious, even absurd. Yet when placed upon a head, the hat would whisper into the ear of the child, peering deep into their nature, seeing what perhaps they did not yet know about themselves. It was not bound by surface appearance. It could look past fear to find hidden courage, past shyness to find cleverness, past pride to find kindness. Its choice was not always simple, for many children carried traits of more than one house, and so it would weigh the balance carefully. Sometimes it argued within itself, the voices of the founders clashing inside the brim, until at last a decision was reached. From then on, the ceremony of sorting became the first great tradition of Hogwarts. At the start of every year, the students would gather in the Great Hall, the enchanted ceiling above them reflecting the sky, candles floating in gentle light. Each name would be called, each child would walk to the stool, and the hat would be lowered upon their head. Some were placed quickly, as if their path were clear. Others sat long as the hat debated, whispered, even offered them a choice. For the hat was not absent. It could listen to the will of the child, and sometimes allowed them to guide their own fate. The sorting hat became more than a tool. It became a guardian of the school's balance. Its song, sung each year, carried reminders of the houses, of the founders' ideals, and sometimes of warnings that the school must remain united. Students laughed at its quirks, but in truth it was one of the deepest magics of the castle, for within it lingered the voices of those who had built the school itself. It is said that in its earliest years the hat carried Slytherin's voice more strongly, and that its counsel to him was sharper than to the others. When he departed the school, the hat's balance shifted, but never lost his presence. His ambition still whispered within, and sometimes it placed students in his house who would carry his vision onward. Yet it also honored the others faithfully, remembering Helga's patience, Rowena's wit, and Godric's courage. The hat became the one place where the four remained united, even when their living selves had drifted apart. For the students, the hat was a mystery and a marvel. Many feared its judgment, for it seemed to see more than they knew about themselves. Others trusted it, believing it would guide them to the place they belonged. In time it became a comfort, for no child of magic need feel lost. There would always be a place, always a house waiting, always a song to remind them that they were part of something greater. Generations passed, and the sorting hat endured. It never aged, never frayed, though its seams looked worn. It remained as constant as the stones of the castle, an heirloom of the founders that needed no repair. Each year it spoke, each year it sorted, and in its way it kept alive the voices of the four. The creation of the sorting hat was perhaps the greatest act of unity among them. In its fabric lay their shared dream, their shared will, their shared belief that Hogwarts must live beyond them. Even as Slytherin's path darkened and his departure loomed, the hat stood as proof that once they had been of one mind, that once they had built together. When children in later centuries placed the hat upon their heads, they did not always know the weight of what it carried. They heard only the whisper of where they belonged. But deep within, the echoes of the four founders still spoke, still debated, still sought to guide. The hat was more than cloth and thread. It was the memory of a beginning, the living remnant of a time when four great witches and wizards dared to create a school that would outlast them all. While the sorting hat carried the unity of the four, beneath the castle, another legacy was taking shape. One that spoke not of harmony, but of division. Salazar Slytherin, though gone in body, had left behind more than memory. In the deepest layers of the castle, carved into stone, hidden from all but those who carried his gift, he created the Chamber of Secrets. The chamber lay far below the dungeons, deeper even than the lake's roots. Its entrance was hidden behind stones sealed with serpents, enchanted so that only a true Parselmouth could open it. No charm or spell of another could break that seal, for Slytherin had woven his own tongue into the magic. Within lay a vast chamber, columns carved with serpents stretching high, their eyes glinting in torchlight that burned without fuel. At its heart stood a statue of Slytherin himself, stern and towering, watching with cold pride. It is said that Slytherin built the chamber in the earliest years of the school, when debates with the other founders had already begun to strain his bond with them. He believed with unshaken certainty that the school must one day be purged of those he deemed unworthy. He did not trust that the sorting hat, even filled with his voice, would hold firmly enough to his vision. He wanted a fail-safe, a secret power sleeping under stone, ready to act if his fears of weakness ever came true. It was in this chamber that he placed the creature most feared of all, the basilisk. Born of a chicken's egg hatched beneath a toad, the basilisk grew into a serpent of terrible size, its gaze deadly to any who met its eyes. Only a Parselmouth could control it, and even then it was a dangerous ally. To Slytherin, it was the perfect guardian, the perfect weapon, one that would sleep until called by a descendant to cleanse the school. The chamber was more than a weapon. It was also a statement of distrust, a silent wound in the foundation of the school. It whispered of Slytherin's belief that one day the others would fail, that only he could protect the purity of their kind. It was as though he could not bear to leave the future to chance. His friends sought unity. He prepared for division. His departure from the school did not end his influence. It buried. No one knows for certain whether the other founders ever suspected what he had done. Gryffindor was wary of him. Helga spoke often of his secrecy. Rowena watched him closely. Yet none found the chamber, and when he left the castle, his secret went with him. Above their heads, the school continued. Children learning, houses competing, the sorting hat singing. Beneath their feet, the basilisk slept, coils wound in the dark, waiting for centuries. Generations passed, and the chamber remained hidden. Some whispered of it in rumor, but most dismissed it as legend. Teachers spoke of it rarely, students almost never. The castle itself seemed to keep the secret, its stones silent, its passages closed. Only those who carried the gift of Parseltongue might have felt its presence, faint as a dream, but even they could not stumble upon it by chance. The entrance waited, sealed until called. Yet, though hidden, the chamber shaped the legacy of Slytherin House. Whispers of its existence lingered among his descendants, feeding their pride, reminding them that their founder had left them a gift no other house could claim. Some sought it, but none succeeded, for the enchantments were too deep. Others dismissed it, caring little for old legends. Still, the idea of the chamber added to the aura of Slytherin, giving it both fear and fascination in the eyes of the other houses. For centuries, nothing stirred. The basilisk slept on, growing ever larger in the dark, unseen and unchallenged. The school above thrived. Students laughed, feasted, studied, and dreamed, never knowing that in the stone beneath their feet coiled a terror that could end them all. Only in the far future would its eyes open again. The Chamber of Secrets stood as the darkest mark of the Founder's time, a reminder that even in creation there can be fracture, that even in unity there can be hidden discord. Hogwarts was meant to be a home for all children of magic, yet buried within it was a chamber meant to divide them, to destroy some for the sake of others. It was a secret too great for the early years to bear, and so it slept, waiting for the hand of fate to awaken it. If Gryffindor was the flame of bravery, Hufflepuff the hearth of kindness, and Ravenclaw the light of wisdom, then Salazar Slytherin was the shadow of ambition, a figure as complex as he was powerful. His name is remembered with fear by many, Yet in his own time he was not a villain but a visionary, a man who believed with fierce conviction that the survival of magic required strength and cunning above all else. His story, woven into the earliest stones of Hogwarts, is one of greatness tangled with pride, of foresight bound tightly with distrust. Slytherin was born in the fenlands of eastern England, in a region of marsh and mist where serpents slid silently beneath the reeds. His family had long been known for their mastery of certain magics, especially those tied to serpents and water. From childhood, he displayed a gift rare even among witches and wizards, the ability to speak Parseltongue, the tongue of snakes. This gift set him apart, marking him as one touched by ancient power, admired by some, feared by others. He grew into a wizard of great skill, his spells often subtle, crafted with layers of intent. While Gryffindor swung a sword and Rowena wove grand enchantments, Slytherin preferred magic that waited in silence, ready to strike with precision. He was patient, he was cunning, and he believed that survival in a dangerous world required more than courage or cleverness. It required ambition, the will to rise above, and the resolve to do what others would not. When the founders came together, Slytherin agreed that a school for young witches and wizards was needed. He believed in the value of gathering students, of training them in secrecy and safety. Yet from the beginning, his vision differed. He argued that only children of magical families should be admitted, for he feared that those born to non-magical parents could not be trusted. In his eyes, Muggles feared what they could not understand, and to allow their children too near to magic would invite danger. He worried that secrets would be betrayed, that magic would be diluted, that the survival of their kind depended on keeping their line strong. The others disagreed. Gryffindor saw bravery in all children of magic. Helga opened her arms to every student. Rowena sought brilliance wherever it appeared. Slytherin's belief set him apart, and though he did not turn his back at once, the seed of conflict was planted. In the house that bore his name, he gathered those who shared his ideals. He chose students who were ambitious, resourceful, cunning, who saw obstacles not as walls but as challenges to be bent or broken. He praised not only skill but also strategy, not only power but the willingness to use it wisely. His students learned to look ahead, to plan, to seek opportunity where others saw none. Some of them would rise to great heights, others to dark deeds, yet all carried the mark of his teaching, that survival required more than strength of arm, that the future belonged to those who seized it. Slytherin's chambers were built deep beneath the castle, near the waters of the Great Lake. The entrance was hidden behind stone carved with serpents, and within the walls glistened with damp, echoing with the sounds of water and whispering scales. His students studied there in shadows lit by green light reflected from the depths. To them, the lake was a reminder of secrecy, of power hidden beneath still surface. He was said to have been a master of charms and defensive magic, laying wards that twisted the paths of enemies, spells that bent truth itself, enchantments that lingered long after his death. His students admired his brilliance, even as others grew wary. He could create spells that others struggled to even comprehend, and in his mind, such power had to be guarded. Yet it was his greatest secret that defined his legacy. Deep beneath the castle, in a place known only to him, he built the Chamber of Secrets. It was hidden from the other founders, sealed with enchantments that only a true Parselmoth could open. Within he placed a creature of terrible power, a basilisk, intended to purge the school of those he believed unworthy should the need arise. To him it was not cruelty but preparation, a safeguard against what he saw as the weakening of their world. To others, it was a seed of fear that would one day bloom into darkness. The rift between him and the others widened As more children arrived at Hogwarts, Muggle-born students were welcomed with open arms by Helga, praised by Rowena, protected by Gryffindor. To Slytherin, their presence was a risk too great. His words grew sharper, his warnings heavier. He told them that the world outside feared magic, that enemies would rise, that only the strong bloodlines could keep their world alive. His voice was stern, unyielding, and though many listened, many more turned away. Gryffindor confronted him most fiercely. Where Slytherin saw danger, Gryffindor saw potential. Their arguments shook the halls, fire meeting shadow, sword meeting serpent. Helga tried to soothe, Rowena tried to reason, but the division only grew. At last, unable to reconcile his vision with theirs, Salazar Slytherin departed the castle he had helped to build. He left behind his house, his chambers and his hidden chamber, his ambition echoing in stone long after his footsteps faded. His departure was not without sorrow. Some stories say that he left in anger, cursing the castle. Others whisper that he left with regret, knowing his friends would never share his view. Whatever the truth, the school endured without him, but his shadow remained. The chamber waited in silence. His ideals lived on in his students, and the name of Slytherin carried both greatness and danger into the centuries to come. Yet to see him only as dark is to miss the complexity of his legacy. His belief in ambition taught students to reach higher, to see beyond the moment, to claim a future others might not dare to dream. His cunning gave Hogwarts defenses that endured for centuries. His house produced not only dark wizards but also leaders, inventors, ministers, and minds that shaped the wizarding world. His vision was flawed, but it was powerful, and its mark on Hogwarts could never be erased. In the heart of the castle, the presence of the four founders lingered, each shaping their house, each leaving behind ideals that would clash and harmonize through the ages. But it was in the shadow of Slytherin that the first true cracks appeared, cracks that would one day widen into legend. Those shadows lingered beneath the castle where the Chamber of Secrets lay sealed. Above, in the bright halls of stone, life moved with rhythm and warmth. For the children who first filled its dormitories and classrooms, Hogwarts was not yet a legend. It was their home, alive with new wonders each day. A place where they were no longer outcasts but students together. The early days of the school were marked by discovery. Many of the traditions that would later feel eternal were still being shaped. The sorting had only just begun to settle into ritual. The Great Hall, with its ceiling enchanted to mirror the sky outside, was a marvel to those who entered. Students sat beneath floating candles, their eyes wide as the stars appeared above them, while meals came steaming from dishes that filled themselves. Some whispered that it was Helga Hufflepuff who first worked with the house elves to enchant the feasts, ensuring that food was never scarce and that every student would feel cared for. Classes were less structured than they would later become, but they carried excitement and challenge. Gryffindor taught defense, and his lessons demanded courage as much as skill. Rowena guided charms and spells of logic, often assigning riddles as homework, for she believed that the mind must stretch to grow. Helga taught herbology and potions, her classrooms filled with earthy smells and bubbling cauldrons, her hands always patient as she guided clumsy fingers. Slytherin, while he remained at the school, taught subjects of secrecy and survival, showing students how to bend magic in ways subtle but powerful. Even after his departure, some of his methods lingered in the lessons of his house. The castle itself was part of their education. Staircases moved beneath their feet, forcing them to learn not only spells but quick thinking. Portraits spoke, sometimes offering advice, sometimes tricking those who did not listen carefully. Hidden doors appeared where none had been, leading to secret passages known only to the bold or the curious. Students quickly learned that Hogwarts was alive, that the castle itself seemed to test them as much as the teachers did. Friendships grew quickly in such a place. Children who had once hidden their gifts at home now shared them freely. They practiced spells together, laughed when charms went wrong, comforted one another when homesickness pressed heavy in the night. Rivalries also grew, sharpened by the houses, each eager to prove themselves. Yet even rivalries carried energy, pushing students to study harder, to train longer, to show the worth of their house. The dormitories became sanctuaries. In Gryffindor Tower, students warmed themselves by fires that never burn out, sharing stories of bravery real and imagined. In Hufflepuff's chambers near the kitchens, children slept in round, cozy rooms, lulled by the smells of bread and soup. In Ravenclaw's tower, the common room was filled with high windows, where students whispered beneath the stars and puzzled over riddles before the fire. And in the depths of Slytherin's common room, light rippled green from the lake outside, shadows long and quiet, students speaking in low voices of ambition and cunning. Quidditch had not yet been born in those first years, but students found games of their own. They raced on broomsticks across the grounds. They dueled in courtyards with laughter and sparks. They explored the Forbidden Forest, despite warnings, returning with stories that grew larger each time they told them. These adventures became part of daily life, shaping bonds that lasted through their years at the school. The Great Hall feasts were the heart of the day. Morning brought bread and fruit, midday offered hearty stews, and at night the hall glowed with candlelight as laughter and chatter filled the air. Teachers sat at the high table, sometimes smiling at the noise, sometimes stern when arguments grew too loud. Even in those early years, the hall was a place of belonging, where every child of magic, no matter their birth, found a seat at the table. Life at Hogwarts was not without fear. Ghosts had already begun to settle in the castle, some welcomed, some unsettling. The Grey Lady, who would one day be known as the Ravenclaw Ghost, drifted silently through her tower, her sorrow barely understood by those who saw her. The Fat Friar, kind and jovial, welcomed new Hufflepuffs with smiles. The Bloody Baron haunted the dungeons with grim silence, his chains clinking softly in the dark. Nearly headless Nick entertained Gryffindors with tales of his near miss at a proper beheading. For the students, ghosts were both companions and reminders of the mysteries that lingered in the castle walls. There were dangers too. The Forbidden Forest held creatures that tested courage, trolls roamed the mountains beyond, and dark wizards sometimes cast their gaze toward the growing school. Yet within the walls of Hogwarts, children felt protected. Wards woven by the founders shielded them. Professors watched over them, and the very castle itself seemed to defend its young. As the years passed, daily life began to take on rhythm. Sorting, feasts, classes, friendships, adventures, exams. Each student carried away memories of laughter in corridors, of nights spent whispering secrets by candlelight, of mornings when the sun rose over the towers and the sound of owls filled the sky. Hogwarts became not only a school but a home, alive in their hearts. Though centuries have since passed, the spirit of those early years lingers. Every student who steps into the castle feels a touch of what those first children felt. The awe of belonging, the wonder of magic shared, the comfort of knowing they are no longer alone. That was the gift the founders had dreamed of, and in daily life it came true. The world beyond the lake and the towers did not grow calmer as Hogwarts found its rhythm. The ages that followed the founding were hard ones, heavy with fear and suspicion, when fires were lit in village squares and whispers turned to accusations. Across valleys and along the coasts, rulers changed and banners rose. Soldiers marched through winter fields, and common people hid from storms that were made by men rather than by the sky. In such a time, the castle became more than a school. It became a refuge. It became a promise that the young would be protected until they were strong enough to protect themselves. From the first autumns of that age, letters went out to families who had never before heard of a safe place for their magical children. Some replied with relief, their quills shaking as they wrote by candlelight, grateful that their sons and daughters might learn without fear. Others were wary, unsure if inviting a messenger to their door would invite danger with him. There were nights when professors traveled by broom above fog and frost, landing on distant moors to speak softly with mothers and fathers who had lived too long with fear. The invitation was always the same. Send your child to the Highlands. There is a castle you cannot see, yet it will welcome them. There they will be fed and taught and hidden from those who would not understand. Hogwarts answered fear with wards. The protections that the founders had laid were strengthened each year by headmasters and headmistresses who understood that secrecy was not cowardice, it was survival. Charms hid the towers in drifting weather. Confusion spells turned the feet of wandering travelers so that their paths curved away from the grounds. Enchantments washed the memory from those who looked too closely and saw only ruins and danger where a great castle stood. The lake itself seemed to defend the shore, mists rising when strangers came near, ripples widening with warning. There were summers when the gates were never opened to anyone not already known to the school, and winters when no owl carried letters beyond the mountains unless the sky was clear of eyes. Inside, life remained orderly, yet even the younger students felt the change in the air. They learned why the torches never went fully dark, why the suits of armor stood ready in certain corridors, why portraits along the main stairs were taught to keep silent when unknown faces walked below. In common rooms, prefects explained rules that were not written on classroom chalkboards. Do not speak of the school to anyone who has not been invited. Do not show magic to travelers who share your carriage. Do not practice spells in village inns during holidays, no matter how friendly the landlord may seem. They were young, yet they learned quickly, because the world outside was loud with suspicion, and the castle needed them to help keep it quiet. There were seasons of sickness in those centuries, and when illness swept the countryside, Hogwarts became a place of healing as well as learning. Helga's gardens fed more than students, and her methods lived on in those who taught after her. Her beds were expanded along the walls that faced the morning sun. Greenhouses were built of glass and charm, and the steam of brewing rose sweet and bitter in the winter afternoons. Children who returned from holidays pale and shivering were put to bed in the hospital wing, warm with charmed blankets and the glow of watchful lamps. Some of those children had brought with them brothers and sisters who were too young for wands but too magical to be left home. The castle made room. Beds found their way into corners where there had been none, and kitchens sent up bowls until the smallest had eaten and slept. There were wars beyond the mountains, and though the banners carried no magic, the smoke carried the same fear. During such years, the grounds were patrolled at dawn and dusk, and owls were sent with care rather than habit. The forest grew thick, and creatures that disliked the sound of iron drifted deeper among the trees, as if they too trusted the castle more than the roads. Centaurs watched the borders and did not speak of what they saw, though they left marks in the soil that professors learned to read. Acromantulas were not yet a human danger, but there were wolves and stranger things that moved at the edge of sight, and the lessons in defense grew more exact. Wands were held a moment longer before the word was spoken, then lowered with slow control, breath steady, mind still. In the north wing, a classroom that had once held simple charm work became a room of quiet drills. Older students practiced together, learning to shield in unison, to raise a barrier with 10 voices, and hold it through the breath of a single leader. They learned to move as one, to trust the line beside them, to listen for signals that were only a touch on a sleeve or a point of a finger. Their teachers spoke gently, but they did not pretend that skill alone would keep the school safe. Discipline would, and patience would, and a heart that did not delight in the fight but accepted the duty when needed. The castle took in more than students during certain winters. A mother who knew no magic but loved a child who did might be given a bed for a week while storms made the passage home too dangerous. A grandfather with a limp might be allowed to rest under the watch of portraits who recognized the same family jaw in 20 paintings across 3 centuries. They stayed near the kitchens, guided by elves who brought tea and soup and gentle talk. They did not see the deepest halls, and they did not know the true size of the school, but they left with a memory of warmth and a promise that the child they loved would be looked after until the snows melted. Rivalries among the houses did not disappear in those years, but they softened at the edges. When the world outside is loud, the world inside must learn quiet strength. Quarrels at breakfast were often forgotten by supper, and pranks that would once have been considered sport were judged more harshly by prefects who had spent a night on watch. The point hourglass still filled and emptied with rubies and sapphires and emeralds and topaz, yet there were evenings when teachers let a small misdeed go unpunished if it had been done in order to help a frightened first-year sleep. Courage was praised, cleverness too, and ambition when it meant endurance rather than cruelty. Loyalty, steady as a drumbeat, carried the school forward. It was in this age that the library began to gather certain volumes behind chains and glass. Not all knowledge belongs to beginners, and not all spells are safe in a time when fear can twist the hand that holds the wand. Ravenclaw's successors understood this, and so did Gryffindor's. The restricted section was born of caution more than of secrecy. Students who had earned trust could read what lay within under the eye of a watchful librarian, and many did, learning not to fear dangerous magic, but to respect it, to understand it as a force that demanded wisdom as well as talent. Those who tried to slip past charms and locks found themselves gently walked back to the desk by portraits of old librarians who had been summoned by a whisper in the paper. On certain nights, headmasters walked the ramparts and looked down at the lake, its surface black and mild under the stars. They spoke with the giant squid who drifted in the depths, and with merfolk who watched from the cold water below. The merfolk guarded their village and guarded the school as well, for they understood that a quiet castle on the shore is a barrier chaos on the land. They sent warnings when boats that did not belong moved too near at night, and in return professors cast warming charms along the deepest stones when winters turned cruel. There were scattered attempts to break the secrecy of the school. A band of thieves who believed there were treasures buried under the towers. A local lord who heard rumors of a hidden fortress and sent riders to find it. A wandering preacher who believed he had seen a candle floating in a window that should not exist. None of them ever reached the gates. Paths turned, minds clouded. The memory of the journey settled into a muddle that felt like a dream rather than a road taken. The spellwork was firm, and it was not cruel. It was a gentle hand over the eyes, a turn of the head back toward the safe and the known. In the classrooms, the study of concealment became a craft in itself. First and second years learned small glamours that hid a quill mark or softened a stain. Third years learned to mask sound in a corner of a room. Older students studied broader works, the charm that makes a door look like a blank wall, the enchantment that turns a cottage window into gray boards when unfriendly eyes look in. It was not deception for pride. It was discretion for safety. Children who had once imagined that magic would always be fire and flight learned to value spells that were quiet and steady and constant. The castle did not forget to be joyful. There were still feasts, and the candles still shone. and laughter still rolled down the stairwells like a stream. The first snowfall still brought students to the lawns with scarves around their necks and red on their cheeks, and the first blossoms of spring still sent them down to the greenhouses to press their noses to the glass. There were nights when music drifted from an open window and owls paused mid-flight to listen, heads cocked, as if the song itself were a charm. By the time the worst of those medieval storms had begun to pass, Hogwarts had learned a rhythm that would last for centuries. It would open its doors to those who needed shelter. It would teach magic as a craft and as a responsibility. It would guard its secrets, not out of greed, but out of love for the young who walked its corridors. The school grew older, the stones weathered, the wards deepened, and the promise remained. If you are a child of magic, there is a place for you. The world may be full of shouting, but here there is quiet. Learn and rest and grow strong. When you leave, take that strength with you and remember the road home if you ever need it again. So the castle stood through hard winters and cautious summers, and the children within it became adults who wrote letters of their own, sending sons and daughters back along the same hidden paths. The refuge became tradition, then memory, then legend, and still the lamps burned in the windows when the night came down. The castle that rose from the Highlands was more than stone, more than towers and walls. From the very beginning, it was woven with protections that grew layer by layer through the centuries. It was a school, yes, and a home, but it was also a fortress. The founders knew that the world beyond the mountains was filled with suspicion and conflict, and they prepared their creation to endure storms of both steel and spell. The earliest wards were laid by the founders themselves. Gryffindor carved runes of strength into the very ancients so that the walls would not crumble under siege. Hufflepuff laced the stones with charms of endurance, making the castle resistant to weather, fire, and time itself. Ravenclaw crafted enchantments of secrecy, veils that would confuse the eyes of Muggles who strayed too near, showing them only ruins and danger. And Slytherin, even before his departure, left his mark with twisting protections that bent the minds of intruders, sending them away before they could take more than a dozen steps. As the school grew, new layers were added. Headmasters and headmistresses of later ages reinforced the original wards, each leaving their own craft upon the castle. The enchantments became so numerous and complex that even those who lived within them could not name them all. To outsiders, Hogwarts appeared only as broken walls and forbidding warnings, a ruin best avoided. To those within, it was alive with hidden power, every corridor steeped in unseen guardianship. The Forbidden Forest formed the first natural barrier. Though its name came later, even in the early centuries it was known as a place of danger. Centaurs patrolled its depths, proud and watchful, while other creatures less noble prowled in shadows. The forest became both a threat and a shield, for those who attempted to approach the school from the east found themselves lost in its dark paths. Only those who understood respect for its dwellers could hope to pass unharmed. The lake served as another boundary, wide and deep. It shimmered with enchantments that made its waters almost impossible to cross without permission. Merfolk built their village beneath its surface, keeping watch, their tridents glinting in green light. The giant squid that dwelled in its depth, playful at times, also served as a reminder that the lake was no safe road for intruders. More than once, stories tell of boats that tried to cross its waters only to turn back under sudden storms that seemed to rise from nowhere. The castle walls themselves bore defenses of old magic. Arrows and stones would turn to dust before they struck. Fire would fizzle into smoke. Siege ladders would rot as though they had lain in rain for years. To those within, the walls were comfort. To those without, They were despair. Portraits that lined the corridors were not only art, but eyes, carrying warnings from hall to hall, calling for help when danger stirred. Suits of armor did more than gleam. They could move, march, and defend, their swords lifted by enchantment in times of crisis. Beneath the ground, the wards were even more subtle. Charms woven deep into the soil meant that tunnels dug by enemies collapsed before they reached the foundations. Enchantments tangled the senses, so that invaders who tried to map the school from within found their drawings meaningless. Corridors shifted, staircases changed, doors appeared or vanished. The shifting nature of the castle was not only whimsy but defense, confusing enemies while students laughed at its tricks. At night, the boundaries of the castle grew sharper. No uninvited guest could cross its gates after sundown without being detected. Lanterns along the walls glowed not with flame, but with awareness, flaring when danger pressed near. The stars above reflected on the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall, but they also shone in the towers used by watchful students and teachers alike to mark the passing of nights when the world outside was restless. Hogwarts was never only protected by magic alone. It was protected also by tradition. The loyalty of its ghosts, the watchfulness of its house elves, the unspoken pact of the centaurs and merfolk, all bound together in a web of guardianship. No other school in the wizarding world held so many layers of defense, and none were so deeply tied to the lives of those within. Yet even with all these protections, the castle was never completely invulnerable. History would prove again and again that danger could find its way past wards and spells. Still, the defenses meant that no attack would ever come easy, and that the school stood not only as a place of learning, but as a bastion of safety in a world too often shaken by fear. In those medieval centuries, when wizard and muggle clashed in hidden wars, when fear rose in villages and flames lit up the night, Hogwarts endured. Its towers stood tall through storms. Its wards shimmered unseen but strong, and the children inside slept under the weight of spells that had been laid for them long before they were born. Guardians woven into stone and air, into forest and water, into the very heart of the castle itself. As Hogwarts grew into its second century, the castle stood not only as a school and a refuge, but also as a symbol of unity for the wizarding world of Europe. Yet Hogwarts was not the only great school. Far across the sea, hidden in the forests of northern Europe, stood Durmstrang Institute, known for its focus on strength and martial magic. To the south, in the mountains of France, stood Beauxbaton Academy, a place of refinement and elegance, where students studied the art of spellwork with grace as well as discipline. These schools, each proud in their own way, carried their own legends and traditions. In those early centuries, the magical communities of Europe were more divided than they would ever be again. Borders shifted constantly. Kings and lords fought with steel, while witches and wizards fought their own battles in the shadows. Trust was rare. Fear was common. It was in this atmosphere that the idea of the Tri-Wizard Tournament was born. The story goes that the heads of the three schools met in secret, drawn together by the hope that their students might learn not only rivalry but fellowship. They dreamed of a contest that would show skill and courage, but also bind their schools together in friendship. If the brightest of each school could face danger side by side, then perhaps their countries too might learn a measure of peace. The first tournament was held at Hogwarts. The Great Hall was hung with banners not only of the lion, the eagle, the badger, and the serpent, but also with the symbols of Durmstrang and Beauxbaton. Students of Hogwarts watched with wide eyes as visitors from other lands entered their castle. The French students brought grace and poise, their voices carrying music even in casual speech. The northern students carried themselves with quiet strength, cloaks heavy against the cold. their magic stern and precise. It was the first time many children realized that their world was larger than the stone walls of Hogwarts. The tournament itself was no simple game. It was designed to test the limits of courage, intelligence, and skill. Tasks varied with each age, but they always carried real danger. Dragons were brought into courtyards. Enchanted mazes grew taller than towers. Riddles were woven into spells that could bind or break a careless mind. Champions were chosen by the Goblet of Fire, a great cup of enchanted flame that would not be swayed by bribes or persuasion. Once the goblet named a champion, that choice could not be undone. The risks were great, injuries were common, death were not unknown. Yet for all its danger, the tournament was seen as a mark of honor. To be chosen as a champion was to carry the pride of one's school, to become a symbol for one's peers, to prove that the lessons learned in classrooms could stand against the harshest trials. Hogwarts, with its enchanted walls and wide grounds, became the favored site for many early tournaments. The Forbidden Forest offered creatures for tasks, the lake provided depths filled with secrets, and the castle itself shifted to provide challenges. Students crowded the stands, cheering their champions, learning that though rivalry ran deep, respect could grow as well. Beauxbaton would host some years, Durmstrang others, but Hogwarts always carried the aura of being the heart of the tradition. The tournament brought change to daily life in the school. New spells were studied to prepare future champions. Professors debated ethics of risk and reward. Students whispered of how they would fare if the goblet called their name. And always, when visiting schools arrived, the castle swelled with excitement, its corridors filled with new voices, its great hall alive with languages and laughter from across Europe. But though the tournament was meant to strengthen bonds, it also carried danger beyond its tasks. Rivalries sharpened, tempers flared, and sometimes friendships were broken as quickly as they were made. When accidents claimed lives, sorrow cast long shadows. There were years when the tournament was suspended, when heads of schools agreed that the risk was too great, when parents whispered that it should be ended forever. Yet always it returned, as though the fire of competition was too deeply tied to the pride of the schools to be extinguished. Through the centuries, the Triwizard Tournament became legend. Songs were sung of champions who braved dragons. Tales were told of clever minds who solved riddles that baffled masters, of friendships forged in fire that lasted lifetimes. The tournament was both glory and grief, both triumph and tragedy. But above all, it was a thread that bound Hogwarts to the wider world. In that bond lay both strength and risk, for to open the castle gates was to welcome not only friends, but also dangers that no ward could keep out. Yet still the Goblet of Fire burned, its blue flames flickering with ancient magic, waiting always for the next names to be cast into its heart. The Middle Ages were a time when the world outside the castle gates was filled with fire and fear. Yet within the walls of Hogwarts, the steady rhythm of school life continued to grow. The centuries between the 11th and 15th marked a long stretch of history in which the castle matured, traditions deepened, and legends multiplied. For students of those years, Hogwarts became not just a place of safety, but the center of a magical culture that learned to endure even as kingdoms rose and fell beyond the mountains. Daily life was shaped by routine. Yet routine at Hogwarts never lacked wonder. The Sorting Hat continued its yearly song, reminding each new generation of the founders and their ideals. Students ate beneath enchanted ceilings, studied in classrooms that shifted with need, and slept in dormitories that had been filled for centuries by others before them. The sound of owls at dawn, the hum of bubbling cauldrons, the whispers of quills scratching across parchment, these became the heartbeat of a school that had outlasted rulers and wars. Lessons grew more organized in this age. Early centuries had been marked by improvisation, with the founders themselves shaping classes in their own image. By the 12th century, however, Hogwarts had established subjects that remain familiar even today. Charms, transfiguration, herbology, potions, astronomy, and defense against the dark arts became the pillars of magical education. Professors of each subject added their own touch, passing along methods that slowly formed into traditions. Some of the spells first taught then are still cast by students today, their words unchanged across hundreds of years. The library expanded greatly during these centuries. What had begun as a modest collection of scrolls and books became a vast hall of shelves, filling chamber after chamber. Scholars traveled from far regions to donate or to copy rare magical texts, and the library soon housed knowledge from every corner of the wizarding world. The restricted section was guarded carefully, for darker works of magic were copied as well, sealed behind chains and curses to keep young hands away. Still, whispers told of students bold enough to sneak within, their names half forgotten but their daring remembered. It was in this period that Hogwarts truly became known as a beacon for magical children throughout Britain and Ireland. The letters of admission, carried by owls or by professors themselves, reached homes far and wide. Families who once thought their children cursed discovered instead that they were gifted. To many, that parchment sealed with the Hogwarts crest was more precious than gold, for it promised belonging in a world that otherwise feared them. The Middle Ages brought trials as well. This was the age of witch burnings in the non-magical world, though few real witches perished in the flames. Clever charms protected them, and some even enjoyed the spectacle, pretending to scream while secretly tickling themselves with flame-freezing spells. Yet the threat was real, and Hogwarts tightened its wards during this age more than ever before. Villagers near the castle spoke of strange lights in the sky, of storms that never touched the towers, of ruins that always seemed dangerous to approach. In truth, they had wandered too near and been turned aside by charms older than they could imagine. The ghosts of Hogwarts multiplied in these centuries as well. Some had fallen in duels, others had died of sickness. Still others simply could not bear to leave the castle that had been their truest home. Nearly Headless Nick's beheading occurred in this time, leaving him half alive in legend, forever caught between the worlds. The Bloody Baron, grim and silent, gained his chains after a tragedy tied to Ravenclaw's daughter. The Grey Lady drifted sorrowful in the towers, and the Fat Friar continued to bring cheer to Hufflepuffs, forgiving even those who failed their lessons. New creatures also made the castle their home. House elves served faithfully, their numbers growing as Hogwarts became a place where they were treated more kindly than in many wizarding homes. The giant squid settled into the lake, delighting generations of students who threw food from the shore. Owls filled the owlery until it became one of the noisiest places in the school, a storm of wings at every dawn. Discipline was firm in these ages. Corporal punishments were not unknown, though charms were often used to soften blows or to ensure lessons were learned without lasting harm. Detention sometimes involved cleaning cauldrons by hand or copying entire chapters of text without quill enchantments. Yet for all its sternness, Hogwarts remained beloved, for its strictness was paired with safety and the promise of learning magic without fear. The Triwizard Tournament continued through much of this age, bringing both glory and grief. Some years it was held at Hogwarts, others abroad, but always it filled the castle with excitement when visitors arrived. Students traded stories with their foreign counterparts, learning languages and spells they might never otherwise encounter. Yet tragedies grew more frequent, and by the late 15th century, the tournament was suspended for a long stretch of years, many believing it had claimed too many lives to justify its lessons. The feasts of Hogwarts became famous in this period. the kitchen staff perfecting charms that made dishes appear steaming and endless. Tables filled with roasts, breads, puddings, and pies became symbols of plenty even when the lands beyond the mountains suffered famine. For children who had known hunger, Hogwarts was a paradise, its kitchens as vital as its classrooms. The castle itself changed too. Towers were raised higher, new corridors carved, greenhouses expanded, and the Chamber of Secrets remained unknown in silence. Far below, portraits multiplied, filled with likenesses of past headmasters, headmistresses, and donors who wished to leave part of themselves in the school. Staircases grew more mischievous, shifting not only for safety, but seemingly for sport, testing students' patience while delighting in their confusion. By the end of the Middle Ages, Hogwarts was no longer a fragile creation of four visionaries. It was an institution rooted in tradition, guarded by spells too deep for most to comprehend, cherished by every child who walked its halls. It stood firm while kingdoms burned, while dynasties rose and fell, while the non-magical world tore itself apart with plague and war. Through it all, the lamps of the castle still glowed at night, steady beacons across centuries. As Hogwarts aged into legend, its corridors grew thick with echoes of the past. For every class that graduated, some presence lingered, and in time the castle became a place where the veil between the living and the dead seemed thinner than elsewhere. It was not unusual for students of the Middle Ages to find themselves sharing lessons with companions no longer of flesh and blood, for Hogwarts gathered not only children of magic but spirits of it as well. The Grey Lady, daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw, drifted silent through the towers. She carried sorrow that no student fully understood, though whispers of her tale reached every common room. She was distant, cold in her manner, but those who sought her with patience sometimes earned a soft word, a hint of wisdom passed down from her mother. Her presence gave Ravenclaws a reminder that intellect carried burdens as well as gifts, that brilliance often walked beside loneliness. In the dungeon stalked the bloody Baron, his chains clinking faintly in the dark. His story was darker still, tied to betrayal and blood, his silence heavy with regret. Students of Slytherin feared him, yet they also respected him, for he seemed to guard their house with grim devotion. His pale form, marked by the stains of his violent end, reminded all who saw him that ambition without mercy could lead to ruin. Hufflepuffs found cheer in the Fat Friar, a ghost who had once been a kindly monk before his life was cut short. He welcomed every new student with smiles, offering gentle advice, guiding them when they were lost. He forgave mischief, praised effort more than talent, and became a constant comfort to his house. His laughter echoed in their cellar common room, softening the fears of first years who missed home. Gryffindors knew nearly headless Nick, Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington, a knight whose failed execution left him in a state of awkward limbo. His head hung by a shred of skin, yet he carried himself with dignity. He delighted in telling his tale, though it was filled with frustration at never being fully admitted to the headless hunt. To the children of his house, he was both comic and loyal, a companion who showed them that imperfection was no barrier to courage. But while these ghosts gave Hogwarts personality, loyalty, and guidance, there was another spirit who brought neither wisdom nor comfort. Peeves, the poltergeist, arrived in the castle sometime during these early centuries, and with him came chaos unlike any other. Peeves was not a ghost in the traditional sense. He had never been alive. He was a spirit of mischief, born of the castle itself, a manifestation of the wild magic that thrummed in its stones. Where others whispered wisdom, Peeves shrieked with laughter. Where others offered help, he hurled ink bottles, tipped cauldrons, and blew raspberries at solemn professors. At first, the teachers attempted to banish him, They cast charms, performed exorcisms, even appealed to the Ministry of Magic. Nothing worked. Peeves could not be driven out, for he was tied to the spirit of the school itself. He delighted in their failures, singing rude songs about their attempts, mocking them in rhyme and riddle. In the end, they were forced to tolerate him, though his presence tested their patience daily. Students, however, often adored him. To the young, his antics were thrilling, even when they were the targets. He dropped water balloons from chandeliers, smeared soot across newly polished armor, and whistled rude tunes in the quiet of study halls. For every complaint shouted by a professor, there were a dozen children laughing until their sides ached. Peeves gave Hogwarts a spirit of rebellion, a reminder that not all lessons came from books, that laughter had a place even in stone walls heavy with history. Yet Peeves was not only nuisance. In times of true danger, he sometimes turned his chaos toward protection. When intruders pressed the school in later centuries, Peeves hurled benches at them, dropped trip ropes across corridors, and caused such havoc that even skilled enemies found themselves tangled in distraction. His loyalty was never predictable, but neither was it absent. He was, in his way, part of the defense of Hogwarts, as strange and untrustworthy as he might be. Together, the ghosts and Peeves gave Hogwarts a soul that no other school could claim. Lessons might be forgotten, professors might retire, but the spirits remained. They linked generations, carrying stories of the past into the present. To walk the corridors at night was to walk among centuries, to see faces that had seen things long forgotten, to hear laughter that belonged to no living throat. The Middle Ages may have been dark beyond the castle, but inside its walls the dead and the living coexisted, shaping Hogwarts into something more than stone. It was a place where memory walked, where mischief flew through the air, where sorrow and joy lingered in equal measure. Hogwarts was alive not only with children, but with echoes, and those echoes would never fade. By the dawn of the 17th century, Hogwarts had stood for more than 500 years. Its stones were weathered, its portraits crowded the walls, and its staircases had grown so mischievous that even professors were sometimes caught wandering in circles. The castle had become not only a school but a tradition, a place known by every witch and wizard across Britain and Ireland, a name whispered with awe by families who dreamed of sending their children through its great oak doors. The 1600s were a time of both growth and caution. The wizarding world beyond the castle had learned to hide itself more carefully, for this was the age of witch hunters, of suspicion and trials, of torches carried into night skies. The statute of secrecy was not yet written, but the need for it grew more obvious each year. Wizards and witches retreated from open life, and Hogwarts stood as the quiet proof that secrecy could protect what mattered most. Its wards were strengthened, its boundaries renewed, until the castle seemed as unreachable as the moon to those without magic. Inside, however, life was vibrant. The houses had long established their traditions, and the Sorting Hat had grown into its role as both judge and storyteller. Each autumn, its song was awaited with hushed breath, for students believed the hat might reveal warnings as well as wisdom. Sometimes its verses reminded them of unity, sometimes of rivalry, and sometimes of dangers that seemed too sharp to be simple rhyme. Yet the tradition endured, and the sorting feast became the beginning of every Hogwarts year. Candles floating high above the hall, shadows flickering across enchanted banners. It was in this century that Quidditch began to take root within the grounds of Hogwarts. The sport had existed in cruder forms across the countryside for centuries, played on marshes and fields by reckless flyers. At Hogwarts, however, it found refinement. Pitches were built, rules were established, and the four houses began to field their own teams. The roar of brooms and the cheers of students echoed across the lawns, and Quidditch became as central to school life as lessons themselves. Rivalries grew fierce, yet they brought the houses together as much as they divided them. Victories were celebrated in feasts that lasted until dawn. Defeats softened by laughter and the promise of next year. Academics deepened as well. Astronomy lessons reached new heights as telescopes imported from across Europe were brought to the tower. Potions masters experimented with recipes that would later become staples of magical medicine. Charms grew in complexity, and students were challenged with enchantments that demanded patience and subtle control. The 17th century also saw a flowering of transfiguration, with students learning to turn not only objects but living creatures into new forms, though always under stern supervision. Accidents were frequent, and the hospital wing grew busier than ever. Yet from mistakes came mastery, and Hogwarts gained a reputation for producing some of the greatest transfigurers of the age. The Great Plague that struck the non-magical world in the mid-century caused fear beyond the walls, but within Hogwarts students were protected by charms of purification and wards against sickness. Still, the atmosphere was heavy with concern, and professors reminded their pupils that secrecy was vital, for to reveal the existence of a school immune to such horrors would invite disaster. During those years, fewer outings were allowed, fewer letters sent, and the castle became a world unto itself. Yet the children laughed and studied and grew strong. And when the plague passed, Hogwarts opened its windows wide again to the bright air. It was also during this time that more ghosts joined the castle, victims of battles or tragedies beyond its walls, drawn back to the place that had been their truest home. Their presence deepened the sense that Hogwarts was timeless, that each generation walked not alone but in the company of centuries. Traditions of feasting and celebration grew more elaborate. Christmas at Hogwarts became renowned, with enchanted trees that touched the ceilings and snowfall drifting through the Great Hall without chilling a single plate. Halloween feasts filled the air with pumpkins carved by magic, their faces glowing warmly, bats fluttering in the rafters, music echoing from ghostly choirs. These celebrations became markers of the year, steady anchors for children who sometimes felt lost in the vastness of the castle. By the end of the century, Hogwarts had become what it remains today, a place where education, tradition, and protection wove together. The world outside might burn, might turn against itself with fear and war, but within the walls, the lamps still glowed. The sorting hat still sang. The owls still swept in with letters and parcels, and children of magic still found their place, their friendships, and their strength. The 17th century left Hogwarts stronger than before, its traditions settled, its walls more deeply bound with protective enchantments. It had gained from a bold experiment of 4 great minds into the enduring heart of magical Britain, a beacon that promised each new child of magic that there was a place for them, a place that would remain constant even when the world outside changed beyond recognition. The 18th century was an age of change across the wizarding world, and Hogwarts was no exception. Outside its walls, the wizarding community faced pressure to retreat further into secrecy. By 1692, the International Statute of Secrecy had been signed, sealing magic away from the eyes of Muggles more firmly than ever before. The century that followed was one of careful separation, of hiding in plain sight, of building stronger rules that kept the two worlds apart. Hogwarts, already shielded by wards and tradition, became not only a school but also a symbol of compliance with the new order. Within its walls, secrecy was taught as much as spellcraft, for children had to learn not only how to perform magic, but when never to show it. In this age, reform swept through magical education. Lessons that had once varied widely from professor to professor began to follow clearer standards. Charms were organized into levels, beginning with spells of light and levitation, advancing to those that manipulated objects and minds. Potions recipes were catalogued, ingredients carefully classified, and mistakes recorded so that students would not repeat errors that had caused accidents in earlier centuries. Transfiguration, once a subject that left many wounded or bewildered, gained stricter rules about what could be practiced by which year. Students were pushed harder, but they were also guided more carefully, and the balance made for safer, steadier learning. It was also during the 1700s that the Ministry of Magic began to take more notice of Hogwarts. Inspectors were occasionally sent to ensure that the school followed the new secrecy laws, that professors were not reckless, that dangerous magic was not taught too freely. These visits were often unwelcome, for Hogwarts valued its independence, yet they forced the school to create more formal systems of discipline. Records were kept of student progress, detentions were tracked, punishments logged, and for the first time the headmaster or headmistress was required to write reports that might be read by ministry officials. Hogwarts remained free in spirit, but its work became more structured, more official, as though the age of wild invention had settled into one of careful refinement. The 18th century also brought changes in the student body. By now, Hogwarts had long accepted Muggle-born children, but the new statute of secrecy made their presence more sensitive. Parents had to be reassured that their children would be hidden and safe. Professors were trained to explain the importance of secrecy to first years who arrived from non-magical homes, often bewildered by what they had entered. Owls carried letters with greater caution. Charms cloaked the path to the station at Hogsmeade, and new enchantments were laid on the school to guard it against discovery. Academically, new subjects began to appear. Care of magical creatures grew from a few lessons into a recognized class, though it was often elective and sometimes seen as dangerous. Divination was taught sporadically, depending on whether a teacher of the art was available. Arithmancy and ancient runes grew more prominent, reflecting a growing scholarly interest in the deeper structures of magic. By the end of the century, Hogwarts students could study subjects that had not existed when the school was first founded, the sign of how magical education had expanded beyond the dreams of the founders. Quidditch, too, became formalized. Matches had been played at Hogwarts for more than a century, but in the 1700s they became central to school identity. The 4 house teams gained official uniforms, banners, and schedules. The pitch was improved, stands expanded, and referees trained in stricter rules. Rivalries sharpened, and victories were celebrated with such enthusiasm that even the ghosts joined in, drifting above the pitch to cheer or to jeer. Quidditch brought unity to each house and competition to the school as a whole, and by the end of the century it had become inseparable from the identity of Hogwarts. The 1700s were not without turmoil. Goblin rebellions flared during this period, shaking the wizarding world with violence and mistrust. Hogwarts was never directly attacked, but the fear of uprising left its mark. Lessons included more defense. Students were taught to shield and disarm, and for a time the castle gates were closed to visitors. Professors reminded pupils that Hogwarts was a sanctuary, but also a fortress if it needed to be. The suits of armor were polished more often in those years, as if ready for use. Tradition remained strong even amid reform. Feasts still filled the Great Hall. Owls still swooped at breakfast with letters and parcels. Ghosts still drifted in their familiar haunts, and Peeves still caused chaos whenever he pleased. Yet behind the laughter and the candlelight, there was a stronger sense of order. Hogwarts had grown from a dream into an institution, and now it was adapting to fit a world that demanded secrecy and structure. By the close of the century, the school was recognized not only as a place of learning, but as the model for how Wizarding Britain itself should live. Hidden, careful, disciplined, yet still full of magic, still alive with wonder. Students who graduated from Hogwarts in this time carried with them not only spells and charms, but also the unshakable sense that they were guardians of a secret world. By the beginning of the 19th century, Hogwarts had become more than a fortress of learning. It was a symbol of continuity in a world that shifted rapidly beyond its walls. The wizarding world was adapting to industrial revolutions that reshaped Muggle society, and though witches and wizards often kept themselves apart, the pace of invention outside did not leave them untouched. Hogwarts, rooted in ancient stone, remained constant, yet within its corridors change stirred as new headmasters and headmistresses left their mark. The castle itself expanded in these years. Additional classrooms were carved into towers and basements to hold subjects that had grown too large for their earlier spaces. Greenhouses multiplied, each one larger and warmer, filled with magical plants imported from distant lands. The library grew again, its shelves stretching upward until ladders charmed with balance were required to reach the highest tomes. A new wing was added for the hospital, as students in this age were encouraged to attempt spells more complex and sometimes more dangerous than in earlier centuries. The castle absorbed every addition, its stones shifting to make room as if it were alive. Magical creatures became a greater presence on the grounds. The Forbidden Forest, always home to beasts of shadow and wonder, grew wilder as the century progressed. Herds of centaurs multiplied, unicorns wandered nearer to the edge of the trees, and other creatures, both gentle and dangerous, took refuge beneath its canopy. Some were brought deliberately by professors, eager to show students a broader picture of magical life. Others arrived on their own, drawn by the power that clung to the land around the castle. The lake too grew crowded, its merfolk village thriving, its giant squid a familiar sight to children who tossed food into the water. Even the skies above saw greater traffic, as owls, hippogriffs, and the straws all played their part in the life of the school. The century also brought new subjects into sharper focus. Care of magical creatures became a recognized discipline, no longer just an occasional lesson. Professors led students into the forest to study bowtruckles, nifflers, and even werewolves, though under tight control. Arithmancy and ancient runes flourished, attracting minds that wished to understand not only how magic worked, but why. The curriculum grew broad, a reflection of an age that prized learning and exploration. Several headmasters and headmistresses of this century were remembered with great respect. Phineas Nigellus Black, though unpopular with many students, left a lasting mark through his sharp intellect and political ties. His portrait, hung later in the headmaster's office, would continue to comment long after his lifetime, a reminder of his wit and his sometimes cold wisdom. Other leaders sought to balance discipline with warmth, creating a school that was both strict in study and rich in tradition. It was during the 1800s that Hogwarts deepened its reputation for eccentricity. Professors experimented with new methods, sometimes with spectacular results, sometimes with near disaster. Charms teachers attempted large-scale enchantments in class, causing corridors to glow for weeks. Potions masters brewed draughts so volatile that their fumes changed the color of students' hair. Transfiguration professors turned entire classrooms into temporary forests or rivers, testing their pupils' ability to adapt. The castle thrived on such variety, and though parents sometimes complained, students rarely forgot their lessons. Quidditch also grew stronger as a tradition. Teams from the four houses played with skill and pride, and by mid-century, the matches had become grand events. The pitch was expanded, stands rebuilt, and banners enchanted to ripple with house colors even without wind. Victories were celebrated with feasts, defeats with determination to do better next year. By the end of the century, Quidditch at Hogwarts was as beloved as the feasts and the sorting hat, a rhythm of school life that bound students together. The century was not without tension. Goblin rebellions continued into the early 1800s, shaking the wizarding world and bringing fear even into Hogwarts. While the castle was never directly attacked, defenses were tightened, patrols increased, and lessons in defense against the dark arts sharpened in focus. The Ministry of Magic also pressed harder on Hogwarts, ensuring that the Statute of Secrecy was obeyed. Professors reminded students again and again of the dangers of revealing magic to Muggles, and detentions grew harsher for those who risked discovery. Despite the pressures, Hogwarts in the 1800s was remembered as a time of richness and growth. The castle filled with laughter and learning, ghosts multiplied in their familiar haunts. Peeves remained as mischievous as ever, and the Sorting Hat sang of courage, wisdom, loyalty, and ambition to each new generation. Children who walked its halls carried away not only spells and skills, but memories of a place that seemed to breathe with life itself. By the century's close, Hogwarts stood stronger than ever, its stones steeped in history, its grounds alive with creatures, its traditions firm, its reputation unmatched. It had survived centuries of change and continued to thrive, a constant beacon of magic in a world that shifted endlessly beyond its hidden borders. The dawn of the 20th century found Hogwarts standing as proud and secretive as ever. The castle had seen wars rise and fall in the non-magical world, had endured plagues and rebellions, and had still kept its lamps lit. Now it faced an age of rapid change, for outside its walls the Muggle world was turning to machines, to engines and factories, to weapons more powerful than ever before. The Statute of Secrecy had to work harder than in past centuries, for curious eyes and advancing technology pressed closer to truths that were never meant to be seen. Yet inside the castle, the rhythm of school life continued, steady as the stars above the astronomy tower. Students of this era arrived with trunks packed, owls perched nervously in cages, cats curling around their ankles, frogs croaking from pockets. They came by train now, for by the late 1800s the Hogwarts Express had become the accepted means of travel. The Scarlet engine carried them from King's Cross to the station at Hogsmeade, and from there the first years crossed the lake in boats as they always had, lanterns glowing on the water. The train journey itself had grown into one of the great traditions, for it gathered every student in one place, turning the long ride into a festival of chatter, sweets, and anticipation. Life within the school had grown more ordered in these years. Subjects were clearly divided, with exams at every stage, and the awarding of OWLs and NEOTs became the measure by which every student's future was judged. Charms professors pushed pupils toward mastery of practical spells that could be used in daily life. Potions teachers enforced stricter discipline, allowing no mistakes in brewing. Transfiguration lessons remained demanding, their masters quick to correct errors with sharp eyes and sharper words. Defense against the dark arts was not yet cursed, but even then it saw turnover, for the subject was difficult and dangerous, and professors often moved on after only a few years. The library of this age was considered one of the greatest in the wizarding world. Its shelves carried texts not only from Britain but from faraway lands, collected by professors who traveled during summers. Students wandered its aisles in silence, lantern light flickering on their faces as they searched for wisdom. The restricted section was more heavily guarded than ever, but still tales spread of those who found ways to slip inside, guided by invisibility cloaks or clever distractions. Hogwarts before Grindelwald was a place of relative peace, though not without undercurrents. Pure blood families still argued over the worth of Muggle-born students, and the Sorting Hat often sang warnings that unity was fragile. House rivalries flared, sometimes spilling into duels in empty classrooms or heated shouts at Quidditch matches. Yet the school endured, its teachers reminding children that the houses were four parts of one whole. Quidditch reached new heights in this century. The pitch was improved with higher stands, and matches drew not only students but visiting families during the holidays. Records of legendary games were kept in the trophy room, and captains were celebrated like heroes. The game became a measure of house pride. Its victories shouted across corridors, its losses mourned in common rooms late into the night. Notable headmasters and professors left their mark in this era. Phineas McGillis, Black's portrait, continued to lecture from the walls, though his living years had passed. Other leaders followed, some stern, some kind, each shaping the school in subtle ways. Herbology grew more formal, with greenhouses filled with dangerous plants that had to be studied carefully. Astronomy lessons included study of comets and eclipses, encouraging students to see themselves as part of a universe larger than the walls of the castle. Outside, wars between Muggles shook the world. The First World War raged across Europe, its thunder faintly heard even in the Highlands. Wizards and witches debated how much they should involve themselves. Though the statute of secrecy held firm, students whispered about it, reading newspapers in hidden corners, wondering how the chaos of the non-magical world might spill into theirs. Some left school early to serve in quiet ways, healing, defending, or simply watching. Others returned home to families scarred by the war. The castle itself remained untouched, yet its windows glowed against nights filled with unease. It was also in these early decades that the shadow of Gellert Grindelwald began to stir. Rumors spread of a wizard rising in Europe, brilliant, charismatic, and dangerous. His ideas about wizard supremacy, his call to step out of hiding, reached even the halls of Hogwarts. Some students whispered admiration, others fear. Professors warned against his teachings, yet curiosity lingered. For the first time in centuries, the safety of Hogwarts felt as though it might one day be tested by forces greater than shifting staircases or mischievous poltergeists. But still, through the first decades of the 20th century, Hogwarts endured in the way it always had. Lessons were taught, feasts held, ghosts drifted, peeves shouted from chandeliers, owls swooped through the rafters, and children grew into witches and wizards who carried their education into the wider world. It was a time of preparation, of quiet before storms. The castle had survived so much already, yet greater challenges were coming, carried on the horizon by the name of Grindelwald. The peaceful rhythm of Hogwarts in the early 20th century could not last forever. Beyond its enchanted walls, a storm was gathering in the form of Gellert Grindelwald, a wizard of extraordinary brilliance and ambition. His name carried whispers through the magical communities of Europe long before his actions reached Britain. He was a student once, though not of Hogwarts, and his expulsion from Durmstrang for dark experiments marked the beginning of a life that would unsettle the entire wizarding world. By the 1920s and 1930s, his influence spread across continents, and even within the safety of Hogwarts, children felt the weight of his shadow. At first, his ideas reached the school as rumors. Older students heard of Grindelwald's vision for a new world where wizards would rise openly above Muggles, where secrecy would end, and where magical folk would claim their rightful place as rulers. Some, especially those from old pure-blood families, found such words tempting. They brought fragments of his philosophy into debates in common rooms, arguing that the statute of secrecy held them back, that wizards should not have to hide from Muggles who relied on machines and armies. Others resisted with equal passion, defending the traditions of secrecy, warning that Grindelwald's path would bring destruction. The Sorting Hat itself in those years sang of division, urging unity, reminding the school that a house divided could not stand. Professors addressed the issue carefully. They did not want to spread fear, but they could not ignore the truth. Defense against the dark arts lessons became sharper, focusing not only on spells but on the moral strength needed to resist dangerous ideas. History of magic lessons turned to past examples of wizards who sought domination and failed. reminding students that power gained without restraint often collapsed under its own weight. Yet Grindelwald's charisma was such that even warnings sometimes had the opposite effect, sparking curiosity rather than quelling it. The presence of Albus Dumbledore at Hogwarts during this time was more significant than students fully realized. Once a brilliant student himself, now a professor of transfiguration, Dumbledore carried knowledge and power beyond anyone else in the school. Unknown to most, he and Grindelwald had once shared dreams of reshaping the world, a youthful bond broken by tragedy. That past haunted him, but it also sharpened his resolve. In classrooms, he guided his students with patience, encouraging them to think deeply, to use their gifts with wisdom, to question not only how to use magic, but why. His presence became a steady light in a world that was darkening. The 1930s brought increasing tension. Grindelwald's followers, known as his acolytes, grew bolder. Attacks were reported in wizarding villages abroad. Magical governments trembled under his influence. Students whispered of relatives who had vanished, of letters that carried fearful news, of entire families divided by whether to support or resist him. Hogwarts itself remained safe, its wards unbroken, but the sense of safety was no longer complete. The Great Hall echoed with more hushed conversations than laughter. The library was filled with students poring over books about dark magic, not out of mischief, but out of fear, trying to understand what was coming. Even Quidditch, usually a joyous distraction, carried the weight of the times. Matches were still played, banners still waved, but the cheers were quieter, the rivalry less sharp. Professors reminded students that Hogwarts must remain a place of unity, that even as the world beyond fractured, the castle must endure as one. Some children listened and held their friendships close, while others carried bitterness into the pitch, their anger echoing beyond the game. The 1940s brought the height of Grindelwald's war. Across Europe, wizarding communities fell under his control, and magical governments collapsed before him. His prison, Nurmengard, stood as a monument to his ambition and cruelty. Even in Britain, fear seeped into daily life. Hogwarts strengthened its wards again, patrols increased, and headmasters worked closely with the Ministry of Magic to ensure that no follower of Grindelwald could slip inside. For students, these years were marked by strict curfews, more detentions for mischief, and fewer trips to Hogsmeade. The castle felt less like a school and more like a fortress once again. In 1945, the storm broke at last. Albus Dumbledore, now not only a professor, but a wizard of unmatched reputation, confronted Grindelwald in a duel that became legend. Though the battle itself did not take place at Hogwarts, its outcome shaped the life of the castle forever. Grindelwald was defeated, imprisoned in the very walls he had built for his enemies, and his reign ended. The wizarding world breathed again, though scars remained. For Hogwarts, the years of Grindelwald's rise and fall were remembered as a time of unease, when even within enchanted walls the weight of the outside world could be felt. Yet they were also remembered as the years when Hogwarts endured, when its teachers and students proved that the castle's heart could remain strong even against fear. The Sorting Hat sang once more of unity, and though division had crept into the school, the children of that age carried away memories not only of dread but of resilience. The storm had passed, but the 20th century still held darker shadows yet to come. For even as Grindelwald's name was locked away in Nurmengard, another child was walking through the doors of Hogwarts, a boy who would one day call himself Lord Voldemort. The storm of Grindelwald's rise had not yet broken over Britain when another shadow began to stir within Hogwarts itself. In 1938, a boy named Tom Marlborough Riddle walked through the gates for the first time. A child who would one day reshape the destiny of the school and the wizarding world beyond it. His arrival marked the beginning of a story that would reach into every corner of Hogwarts, leaving scars upon its stone and upon its legacy. Tom Riddle had been born in a London orphanage in 1926, the son of a witch named Merope Gaunt and a wealthy Muggle named Tom Riddle. His mother died shortly after his birth, leaving him without family or comfort. His father, unaware of the magical world and repulsed by Merope's heritage, had abandoned them long before. The boy grew up in loneliness, feared by the other children for the strange things that happened when his anger flared. Animals seemed to obey him, objects moved when he willed it, and bullies found themselves punished by forces they could not explain. He learned early that he was different, and he carried that knowledge with both pride and bitterness. When Albus Dumbledore came to him with an invitation to Hogwarts, Tom was already used to bending the world to his will. The orphanage staff spoke of his unsettling nature, of the way he could make other children suffer, of his cold charm that made even adults uneasy. Dumbledore, cautious even then, recognized both talent and danger. He placed the letter in Tom's hands and explained that his powers were not a curse but a gift, and that Hogwarts would teach him how to master them. The boy listened with quiet intensity, his dark eyes fixed on every word, already planning how this new world might serve him. When Tom arrived at Hogwarts, he was sorted into Slytherin House. The Sorting Hat, peering into his mind, saw ambition, cunning, and a hunger for greatness that outshone all else. The Hat may have hesitated for a heartbeat, sensing that his gifts could also serve courage or wit, but Tom himself demanded Slytherin. He knew his heritage traced back to Salazar himself through the Gaunt family, and he longed to claim that legacy. The Hat agreed, and thus the boy joined the house that would shape his future. In his early years, Tom impressed every professor. He was brilliant, disciplined, and eager to learn. He excelled in every subject, his wand work precise, his memory sharp, his ability to charm and persuade already remarkable. Teachers praised him, students admired him, and few could see the darkness that lay beneath. Only Dumbledore remained watchful, sensing the cold ambition that Tom hid behind a mask of politeness. It was during these years that Tom began to search for secrets within the castle. He wandered its corridors, listened to whispers, and discovered that Hogwarts held more than classrooms and libraries. The stories of the Chamber of Secrets reached his ears. Tales of a hidden room built by Salazar Slytherin, a room that could only be opened by his true heir, where others dismissed it as legend. Tom believed his gift of Parseltongue, the ability to speak with snakes, confirmed what he had always suspected, that he was the one meant to inherit the chamber's power. In his 5th year, he succeeded. He found the entrance in the girls' bathroom, spoke the word in the serpent's tongue, and the wall of stone slid open. For the first time in centuries, the Chamber of Secrets was unsealed. The basilisk within stirred, answering the call of the boy it recognized as heir. Tom did not unleash it blindly. He was careful, cautious, directing its power as a test. But when a Muggle-born girl named Myrtle Warren was killed, her body left lifeless in the bathroom. The castle shuddered with fear. Hogwarts nearly closed. Parents demanded answers, professors searched in vain, and the ministry pressed for explanations. Tom, however, had already prepared his escape from suspicion. He framed Rubeus Hagrid, a half-giant boy with a love for magical creatures. Hagrid had been raising an acromantula, a monstrous spider named Aragog, and though it had caused no harm within the school, Tom used it as the perfect scapegoat. Hagrid was expelled, his wand broken, and Tom remained untouched, his reputation untarnished. The chamber closed once more, its secret safe in Tom's hands. But he did not stop there. He had already begun to explore darker magics, reading forbidden texts, asking questions about immortality, about the division of the soul. He charmed professors and students alike, But beneath his charm lay cruelty, a hunger for control, a desire for power without limit. By the time he left Hogwarts, Tom Riddle was admired as one of its most brilliant students. He was a prefect, a model pupil, and a boy who seemed destined for greatness in the Ministry of Magic. Yet those who looked deeper saw the truth. Dumbledore watched him with wary eyes. Slughorn, his potions professor, admired his talent, but grew uneasy at his questions about Horcruxes. And those who had crossed him as students never forgot the coldness in his gaze, the way he could make cruelty feel like fate itself. The arrival of Tom Riddle in the 1930s marked the beginning of a shadow that would stretch across the next half-century. He had walked into Hogwarts as an orphan, lonely and unknown. He walked out of it as the man who would one day call himself Lord Voldemort. Tom Riddle's brilliance at Hogwarts grew year by year, but with brilliance came secrecy, and with secrecy came ambition that reached beyond anything his professors could see. By the time he had reached his middle years at the school, Tom was no longer content to be the best student in his classes or the most admired boy in his house. He hungered for something deeper, something that would set him apart from all who had come before. The legend of the Chamber of Secrets became his obsession, for in that legend, he saw proof that he was destined for greatness. The stories of the chamber had drifted through Hogwarts for centuries. Students whispered of a hidden room built by Salazar Slytherin, said to house a monster so terrible it could purge the school of those whom he deemed unworthy. Most dismissed the tales as fable, exaggerations passed down by generations of children eager to frighten one another. Professors spoke of it rarely, often with a tone of dismissal. Yet Tom knew better. His own bloodline carried the name of Slytherin through the Gaunt family, and his gift of Parseltongue proved to him that the legend was truth. He believed that he alone could inherit Salazar's legacy, that he alone was chosen to finish what the founder had begun. His search was patient and precise. He spent long nights wandering the castle, listening for whispers in the walls, testing passages that others overlooked. He charmed ghosts, questioned portraits, and explored the deepest corners of the library. The restricted section became his favorite ground, where books written in ink that shimmered with darkness offered hints of secrets no child should have read. Step by step, he pieced together fragments until he knew where to look. The entrance, as he discovered, was hidden in a place no one would suspect. A bathroom long abandoned after a flood, its walls cracked and mirrors stained, its pipes old and twisted. Few students ever stepped inside, and those who did hurried away, unnerved by the silence. But Tom stood in its shadows and spoke in the language of serpents. The sound of Parseltongue slid from his lips, and the stone stirred. The sink shifted, pipes twisting aside, and before him opened a passage deep into the earth. The Chamber of Secrets was real, and it was his. Descending into the darkness, Tom felt not fear, but triumph. The passage stretched long and cold, its air heavy with centuries of silence. At its end stood a vast chamber, pillars carved with serpents, torches that burned green without fuel, and a statue of Salazar Slytherin himself, tall and stern, stone eyes gazing down with pride. Tom felt the weight of legacy upon him, and he welcomed it. He had found what no one else could. He had claimed what was meant for him. From the statue's mouth slid the basilisk, its scales glinting like metal, its eyes glowing with death. To look directly into them meant the end. But Tom, as Parselmother and heir, commanded the beast. His words coiled through the air, and the serpent bowed to him. In that moment, Tom Riddle felt power unlike any he had ever known. Hogwarts itself seemed to bend before him, for he held within his hand a weapon that could terrify even the bravest wizard. Yet Tom was cunning. He did not unleash the basilisk recklessly. He tested it, directing it through the pipes, allowing it to travel unseen. He listened to its hisses echo in the walls, smiled at the fear that grew as students whispered again of the chamber's return. He wanted not only to control the beast, but to use it as proof of his destiny, to strike fear into the school, to rid it of those he saw as unworthy, and to mark himself as heir to Salazar Slytherin. In his 5th year, the basilisk killed its first victim. A Muggle-born girl named Myrtle Warren was found lifeless in the bathroom where Tom had entered the chamber. Panic swept the school, fear clung to the corridors, and parents demanded that Hogwarts be closed. Professors searched desperately, but the chamber remained hidden. No spell could reveal it, no charm could trace it, for it had been built with secrecy, deeper than even the most skilled wizards of the age could unravel. Tom acted swiftly, weaving his lies with skill. He mourned with the other students, wore sorrow upon his face, and spoke with measured calm to teachers who trusted him. Yet in secret, he crafted a scapegoat. Rubeus Hagrid, a boy of half-giant blood, had been raising a monstrous spider within the castle. To most it was only a dangerous pet, but Tom turned it into proof of guilt. He claimed to have caught Hagrid red-handed, blamed him for the girl's death, and convinced those in power that the threat had been removed. Hagrid's wand was broken, he was expelled, and Tom's hands remained clean. The chamber closed again, but Tom had achieved what he wanted. He had proved to himself that the power was his, that he alone could command the legacy of Slytherin. He left the chamber with confidence, knowing he could return whenever he wished, knowing the basilisk would sleep until called again. Yet even this triumph was not enough. For Tom, power tasted like hunger. The Chamber of Secrets was only one step on the path he had chosen, a path that led beyond Hogwarts, beyond mortality, beyond the limits of ordinary magic. He would return to the chamber again, but by then he would no longer be a student. He would be something darker, something greater, a name that would terrify generations. For now, though, he was still Tom Riddle, still the boy with charm and brilliance, still the student who smiled in the Great Hall and won every prize. Few suspected the truth of what he had done, and those who did were silenced by doubt. The chamber slept once more, its serpent coiled in shadow, waiting for the heir who had claimed it. As Tom Riddle moved through his years at Hogwarts, admired by professors and feared in secret by those who crossed him, another figure was quietly rising in influence within the school. Albus Dumbledore, once a brilliant student himself, now served as Professor of Transfiguration. And though he was younger then than the white-bearded headmaster he would one day become, his presence was already formidable. In an age when Hogwarts stood at a crossroads, with shadows stirring both within and beyond its walls, Dumbledore's wisdom and vigilance grew into one of the school's greatest defenses. Dumbledore's teaching was unlike that of others. He did not simply show his pupils how to change a teapot into a tortoise or a match into a needle. He asked them to think of why such magic mattered, to consider the balance between transformation and permanence, between what something was and what it might become. Many students admired him deeply, for he had a way of speaking that made even the best difficult lessons feel like discoveries. He praised creativity, encouraged curiosity, and often spent extra time guiding those who struggled. To his students, he was not only a professor, but a mentor, and his reputation as one of the greatest teachers in the school grew swiftly. Yet Dumbledore's true influence was felt beyond the classroom. He had seen more of the world than most, and he carried with him lessons from his youth that still weighed heavily on his conscience. His friendship with Grindelwald in his early years had taught him how ambition without restraint could lead to ruin. That tragedy had scarred him, and though he rarely spoke of it, it shaped his determination never again to be blind to danger. When he looked upon Tom Riddle, brilliant, charming, but cold in his heart, Dumbledore's instinct stirred with unease. Unlike other professors who saw only a gifted boy destined for greatness, Dumbledore watched Tom carefully. He noticed the way the boy collected followers, not through kindness, but through subtle threats and manipulations. He saw how Tom never truly formed friendships, only alliances of convenience. He observed how Tom's smile did not reach his eyes, how he studied not only his lessons, but the weaknesses of those around him. Dumbledore spoke with him often, gently but firmly, trying to guide him toward a better path. Yet Tom was wary of him, sensing that this professor saw more deeply than the others. As years passed, Dumbledore's responsibilities at Hogwarts grew. He was consulted by headmasters on matters of security and curriculum, his opinions valued as steady and fair. During Grindelwald's rise, he had already proven his strength, and though the jewel that would make him world famous had not yet come, his reputation as a wizard of extraordinary power spread quietly. Parents trusted him, students respected him, and even those who feared his sharp gaze could not deny the aura he carried. Hogwarts in this era was alive with the usual joys of feasts, lessons, and Quidditch, but beneath the surface tensions simmered. Tom Riddle had already opened the chamber once, had already taken a life, though no one save he and the basilisk knew the truth. Dumbledore did not have proof, but his suspicions never wavered. He kept a closer watch on Slytherin House. He spoke often with Hagrid, and he encouraged vigilance among other staff. His influence meant that even after Hagrid's expulsion, the boy remained at the castle as gamekeeper, a decision that angered some, but that Dumbledore insisted upon. In his view, kindness to those unfairly judged mattered as much as discipline for the guilty. Dumbledore also began to shape the culture of the school in subtle ways. He encouraged students to value cooperation between houses, introducing joint projects and mixed seating in lessons. He pushed for broader study of Muggle subjects, believing that understanding the non-magical world was as important as mastering spells. Some pure-blood families scoffed, but many students found the lessons eye-opening, realizing that courage, loyalty, wit, and ambition meant little if they existed in isolation from the world beyond the castle walls. The more influence he gained, the more Hogwarts reflected his ideals. He fostered an atmosphere where compassion and creativity thrived, where students were reminded that greatness without goodness was hollow. His words lingered in the halls long after lessons ended, carried in whispers from one generation to the next. Yet even Dumbledore could not prevent the rise of Tom Riddle beyond Hogwarts. He could only watch as the boy graduated with honors, gathered his followers, and began his journey toward becoming Lord Voldemort. Still, the seeds of resistance had already been planted, for in the years to come, Dumbledore would not only lead the school, but also the fight against darkness, and those who remembered him as their teacher would recall the steady guidance of a man who saw clearly, who warned them that true power lay not in domination, but in love. Hogwarts, under his growing influence, became not only a place of learning, but a place of conscience, a fortress not only of stone, but of spirit. And though the castle would soon face darker days, the presence of Albus Dumbledore ensured that its heart remained strong. By the 1970s, the shadow that had begun with Tom Riddle's first steps into Hogwarts had grown into a storm that spread across Britain. No longer a gifted student, no longer the prefect admired by professors, Tom Riddle had transformed into Lord Voldemort, the darkest wizard of the age. His rise cast a heavy shadow over every corner of the wizarding world, and Hogwarts, though still a school, could not escape the fear that pressed upon it. The First Wizarding War was marked by terror in villages, whispers in families, and disappearances that shook even the most powerful households. The castle itself was never breached, for its wards and protections were too ancient, too deeply woven into its stones. Yet fear seeped through its walls all the same. carried in the faces of students who had lost parents, in letters that arrived with black seals, in rumors of attacks that spread faster than fire. Hogwarts during this time became a place of contradictions. On the one hand, it was a sanctuary. Children of every house still gathered under the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall, still cheered for their Quidditch teams, still studied for exams by candlelight in the library. On the other hand, the air carried tension. Professors looked at their students with sharper eyes, wondering who among them would one day join the Death Eaters. Friendships were tested, rivalries grew sharper, and loyalty to the Dark Lord became a whispered topic in certain common rooms. Slytherin House, in particular, carried the weight of suspicion. Some of its students came from families already aligned with Voldemort, and others looked upon him with admiration, seeing in him the heir of Salazar, Slytherin, and a wizard of unmatched power. Not every Slytherin supported him, but the mark of his influence lingered there strongest, and it caused division that scarred the house for decades. Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw children whispered among themselves, wary of who might secretly wear the dark mark one day. Yet even in this age, Hogwarts endured because of the guidance of Albus Dumbledore. By then he was headmaster, his long silver beard and half-moon spectacles known to every child who walked the halls. He carried the weight of the war upon his shoulders, yet he never allowed the school to falter. He reminded his professors that children must have laughter, that learning must not end even when darkness pressed near. He filled the halls with warmth where he could, offered wisdom to those who sought it, and gave comfort to students who trembled at night. His office door was always open, and many remembered the calm in his eyes when the world outside seemed ready to collapse. Dumbledore also began to build something beyond the school. In secret, he founded the Order of the Phoenix, gathering witches and wizards who refused to bow to Voldemort, who would fight against him even at the cost of their lives. Many of those recruits were former students, people who had once sat in his classrooms and carried his words into battle. The Order became the hidden shield of the wizarding world. Its meetings whispered, its members hunted. But within Hogwarts, the children were shielded as much as possible, for Dumbledore believed that hope must be kept alive in the young. Lessons continued, though they were colored by the war. Defense against the dark arts grew sharper, with students practicing shields and disarming charms more urgently than before. Potions lessons included antidotes for poisons, whispered to be favored by Death Eaters. History of magic classes became more than dusty recitations, for students wanted to know how wars of the past had ended, how darkness had been defeated before. Even Quidditch, though still played, carried new weight, with students throwing themselves into the sport as though the roar of the pitch could drown out the silence of fear. Tragedy reached the castle all the same. Students sometimes did not return after holidays, their places at the table left empty. Professors taught lessons with sorrow in their eyes, knowing that some children would go home to families already marked by war. The ghosts, usually sources of amusement or comfort, drifted quieter, their faces grave. Even Peeves was less playful in those years, his mischief edged with bitterness. By the late 1970s, the war was at its height. Voldemort's name was spoken in fear. His followers spread terror across the land, and the Ministry struggled to contain him. Within Hogwarts, students whispered that one day even the wards might not hold. Yet Dumbledore's presence kept despair at bay. He faced Voldemort directly, challenged his power, and though their duel would come later, the knowledge that he alone had the strength to oppose the Dark Lord gave courage to many. The war reached its climax in the early 1980s, when Voldemort turned his gaze upon a prophecy that spoke of a child who might defeat him. The prophecy pointed to two possible boys, both born at the end of July, Neville Longbottom and Harry Potter. Voldemort chose Harry, and in doing so set in motion the events that would scar the wizarding world forever. The night he went to Godric's Hollow, the night he killed James and Lily Potter, the night his curse rebounded upon him, was the night the First Wizarding War ended. When news reached Hogwarts that Voldemort had fallen, the castle erupted in celebration. Students cheered, professors wept, owls filled the sky with letters carrying relief. The Great Hall glowed brighter than ever before, yet even in joy there was sorrow. For many had lost family and friends, and the scars of war did not vanish with Voldemort's fall. Still, for a time, Hogwarts returned to peace, its lamps shining again without the weight of shadow pressing at the windows. The night of Halloween in 1981 became one of the most famous moments in wizarding history, and Hogwarts, though far from Godric's Hollow where it happened, felt the echo of it, as if the very stones of the castle had shivered. For more than a decade, the shadow of Lord Voldemort had pressed upon the school, filling it with fear and silence. And then, in a single night, the Dark Lord was, his power shattered, his followers scattered, his body destroyed, and a child left behind. The boy who would be known forever as Harry Potter. News spread like wildfire. The owls carried it faster than any ministry decree, and by morning the wizarding world was ablaze with celebration. Families danced in the streets, fires were lit in villages, goblets raised in feasts. And though Hogwarts was not the stage of the event, the school itself erupted with joy. Students cheered at breakfast, professors allowed themselves rare smiles, and the ghosts carried the news through corridors with solemn wonder. The war was over, the terror ended, and the children could laugh again without glancing over their shoulders. Yet even in celebration, Dumbledore understood the deeper truth. He knew that Voldemort had not been truly destroyed, only broken. He knew that the child who had survived, Harry Potter, carried a scar that was more than skin. And he knew that the prophecy had not ended, but had only begun. Still, he also knew that the world needed peace, that children needed to grow without fear. And so he allowed the joy to flow through the castle, a river of relief after years of drought. The boy who lived became legend overnight. His name was whispered by students in every house, his story told and retold, growing larger with each telling. He was only an infant, hidden away with his Muggle relatives, yet within the halls of Hogwarts he was already a symbol. Children looked at the empty spaces at the long tables and imagined the day when Harry Potter himself would sit among them, carrying the weight of a story older than he could remember. The fall of Voldemort also brought change within the school. The sense of threat that had lingered in every corridor lifted, and laughter returned. Quidditch matches regained their energy, feasts filled with song, and the Sorting Hat's songs grew brighter, speaking less of division and more of unity. For the first time in years, the castle felt as it had in centuries past, a place of learning untouched by war. Yet beneath the peace lay scars. Some students never returned, their families lost to the war. Others carried grief for brothers, sisters, parents who had fallen. The ghosts whispered of bravery, but they also mourned, for the castle remembered all who had walked within it. Even Peeves, for a time, was quieter, his mischief softened by the weight of memory. The ministry declared the war ended, and many Death Eaters claimed they had been bewitched, forced into service, or too frightened to resist. Trials were held, but not all were punished. Some slipped back into society, cloaked in excuses. Others vanished into hiding. The mark of Voldemort lingered, not in his presence, but in the scars left behind. Hogwarts remained the heart of magical Britain, but its heart now carried cracks. For Dumbledore, the years after Voldemort's fall were years of vigilance. He watched carefully, though he rarely spoke of it to his students. He suspected that the Dark Lord would return one day, that the boy who lived would face him again. He guided the school with kindness, yet always with one eye turned toward the shadows. And so the 1980s at Hogwarts became a strange time, filled with laughter and peace on the surface, yet with quiet watchfulness beneath. The students of those years lived in the light, unaware of the storm that still lingered far away. They played Quidditch, studied for exams, snuck into the kitchens for food, and dreamed of their futures. They grew up in a school that seemed eternal, its walls untouched by the horrors of the past. But in the quietest hours of night, when the castle slept, the headmaster walked its halls, his wand casting soft light, his thoughts heavy with memory. He knew that the victory was not complete, that the fall of Voldemort was not the end, but only the pause before the storm returned. And as the years passed, the name Harry Potter lingered in the minds of all, a name that promised hope and a story that was not yet finished. The summer of 1991 marked a turning point, not only for the boy who lived, but for Hogwarts itself. For a decade, Harry Potter had lived far from magic, hidden in the care of his non-magical relatives, unaware of who he was or what he had survived. And then when he turned 11, the letter arrived. It was the same letter that had reached thousands of children before him. Yet this one carried the weight of prophecy and legend. When Harry stepped through the doors of Hogwarts, the school entered a new chapter of its history. The journey began at King's Cross Station on platform 9 3/4, where the scarlet train hissed with steam and the chatter of young witches and wizards filled the air. For Harry, who had lived in a cupboard beneath the stairs, the sight of the train was like stepping into another world. When he boarded, he found not only the beginning of his education, but the friendships that would define his life. Ron Weasley, with his nervous smile and hand-me-down robes, and Hermione Granger, with her sharp mind and eager heart, became companions before the train reached Hogsmeade. The arrival at the castle that night carried all the wonder that countless generations had felt before. The boats crossing the lake glowed with lantern light, the reflection of the towering castle shimmering on the water. For Harry, who had never seen anything like it, the sight was overwhelming, a vision of belonging he had never known. The Sorting Hat, when placed upon his head, debated fiercely, seeing in him both bravery and cunning, both loyalty and wit. Yet Harry chose Gryffindor, and the hat, respecting his wish, placed him where he would find both challenge and family. The 1990s brought Hogwarts into a new age, one where legend and reality walked side by side. Students whispered in corridors about Harry Potter, staring at the lightning-shaped scar on his forehead, wondering how it felt to live as the boy who lived. Some admired him, others envied him, but Harry himself remained bewildered, unprepared for the fame that had followed him since infancy. To him, the castle was not a stage for prophecy, but a home, a place where he had learned, laugh, and belong. Daily life at Hogwarts in Harry's first year carried all the traditions of centuries past. Feasts in the Great Hall filled the air with the scent of roasted meats and pumpkin juice. Quidditch matches roared with excitement, and Harry himself, the youngest seeker in a century, soared across the pitch with skill that stunned both friend and foe. Lessons were both wondrous and difficult. Charms under Professor Flitwick, potions under the watchful and severe Professor Snape, transfiguration with stern Professor McGonagall. Each class tested him in new ways. Yet it was not only in classrooms that Harry learned, but in the countless moments of discovery the castle offered. The shifting staircases, the moving portraits, the hidden passages, all became part of his education. But Harry's first year was no ordinary beginning. Beneath the ordinary lessons, danger stirred. The Philosopher's Stone, a legendary object of alchemy, had been hidden within the castle by Dumbledore himself, its secrets guarded by enchantments that tested courage, wit, loyalty, and ambition in equal measure. Unknown to most, Voldemort, broken but not destroyed, sought the stone as a path back to life. Through the loyalty of Professor Quirrell, who carried the Dark Lord upon the back of his head, the threat of Voldemort entered the school once more. Harry, Ron, and Hermione uncovered the truth step by step, their friendship tested by trials that echoed the very spirit of the houses. They braved the devil's snare, solved riddles, played life-sized wizard chess, and faced challenges meant for adults, not children. At the end, it was Harry who stood before Quirrell and Voldemort, the scar upon his forehead burning with the touch of evil. Through courage, sacrifice, and the protection of his mother's love, he survived once again, and the stone was destroyed to keep it from dark hands. The year ended with Gryffindor winning the House Cup, a triumph of unity and bravery. But the deeper victory was survival, for though Voldemort had been thwarted, the knowledge remained that he was not gone, that he lingered still, waiting for another chance. Hogwarts, which had always stood as a refuge, had once again become the battleground of legend. Yet for Harry, the first year was more than battles. It was the first time he felt at home, the first time he knew friendship, the first time he was seen not as a burden, but as a boy who belonged. For the castle, his arrival marked the beginning of a decade that would shape its history more than any other since its founding. The autumn of 1992 brought Harry Potter back to Hogwarts for his second year, and with it came one of the darkest chapters in the long history of the school. For centuries, the Chamber of Secrets had lain silent, its basilisk sleeping in coils of stone, its legend dismissed as rumor. Yet now, with the heir of Slytherin once more within the castle, the chamber stirred, and the shadow of Tom Riddle returned. From the first weeks of term, unease grew in the air. Whispers began when students found words scrawled in blood upon the wall near the dungeons. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the heir, beware. Beneath the chilling message lay the lifeless form of Mrs. Norris, the caretaker's cat, stiff and still but not dead. Panic swept through the school. Professors hurried to reassure their students, yet fear rooted itself in the halls. For the legend of the chamber, once told as a ghost story, now walked again as truth. The whispers spread quickly. Slytherin House was blamed by many, its students eyed with suspicion, its reputation darkened by old tales of blood purity. Ron, Hermione, and Harry listened to every word and sought the truth themselves. Hermione's sharp mind turned to the library, where she searched through ancient texts for any clue. Harry, troubled by voices only he could hear, followed whispers through the walls, the serpentine hiss of Parseltongue that chilled him though he barely understood why it was his gift. The attacks grew. Students were found petrified, frozen as if carved in stone, their eyes wide with terror. A ghost too fell victim. Merely headless Nick left suspended in spectral silence, and Colin Creevey, the young Gryffindor eager with his camera, lay rigid in the hospital wing. Fear deepened with each strike, and parents began to demand the school be closed. Yet Dumbledore held firm, insisting that Hogwarts must endure, even as he searched in vain for the truth. The legend spoke of the heir of Slytherin, and suspicion fell upon Harry himself. His ability to speak Parseltongue was revealed during a duel, and students recoiled, whispering that perhaps he was the heir. The boy who lived once admired now found himself doubted, his friendships tested, his place within the school uncertain. For Harry, the weight of isolation returned, and he longed to prove the truth, that he was not the one behind the terror. In secret, he and his friends pressed on. They followed clues into the Forbidden Forest, where giant spiders whispered of the true monster, hinting at something older and more terrible than any acromantula. They uncovered the story of Moaning Myrtle, the ghost who haunted the bathroom where she had died decades before, revealing that she had been the girl killed when the chamber was first opened. Piece by piece the puzzle formed until the entrance to the chamber itself was found once more, hidden in the very bathroom Myrtle haunted. It was Ginny Weasley, Ron's younger sister, who had been drawn into the darkness, possessed by the memory of Tom Riddle preserved in an enchanted diary. She had opened the chamber, set the basilisk free, and carried out attacks she did not remember. The diary, a fragment of Voldemort's soul, had bound itself to her, feeding on her spirit until her life was nearly consumed. Harry descended into the chamber, guided by courage and the loyalty of his friends. Beneath the earth, he faced the memory of Tom Riddle, the boy who would become Voldemort, and the basilisk itself, armed with the sword of Gryffindor, brought to him by the loyalty of Fawkes, the Phoenix. Harry struck down the serpent in a battle that echoed across the centuries. The diary was destroyed by a fang driven through its pages, and with it, the memory of Tom Riddle faded into nothing. Ginny was saved, and the chamber sealed once again. When Harry returned to the Great Hall, the fear that had gripped the school lifted at last. The petrified students were revived, feasts filled the tables once more, and Hogwarts breathed again. Yet the Chamber of Secrets, though closed, was no longer a story dismissed as myth. It was real, and it had reminded all who lived within the castle that the past of the founders still lived in shadow, that the legacy of Slytherin was not easily buried. For Harry, the year left scars of doubt and fear, but also of triumph. He had faced not only a serpent of death, but the shadow of Voldemort himself, and he had survived. For Hogwarts, the chamber's reopening became another chapter in its long tale, proof that even after centuries of peace, the secrets of the castle could still rise and threaten those within. The year 1993 began with whispers of fear that reached Hogwarts even before the first carriages carried the students from the station. A prisoner had escaped from Azkaban, the fortress feared by all in the wizarding world. His name was Sirius Black, and the Ministry declared that he had been a loyal servant of Lord Voldemort, the one who had betrayed James and Lily Potter, and the one who had caused their deaths. Now free, the Ministry believed he was hunting Harry. The news hung over the school like a storm cloud. Dementors, the dark creatures who guarded Azkaban, were stationed at the gates and patrolled the grounds, their cloaked forms sending waves of despair over anyone who drew near. For children who had never seen such creatures, their presence was unbearable. The air turned cold, laughter died on lips, and memories of sorrow rose to the surface unbidden. Harry felt their touch more than most, for in their presence he heard the echoes of his parents' last moments, a torment that left him gasping on the ground. Despite the fear, daily life at Hogwarts continued. Lessons began as always, with the sorting feast welcoming the first years, the sorting hat singing its warning once more, reminding students that unity was needed even in times of division. Classes filled with the usual challenges, and yet the air was sharper, as though danger lurked behind every door. Students whispered about Sirius Black, imagining him slipping through shadows, believing he might even already be inside the castle. That year also brought new professors who would shape Harry's life. Professor Lupin, gentle and wise, taught defense against the dark arts with patience unmatched by any teacher before him. He guided his students through practical lessons, showing them how to face boggarts, grindylows, and kappas. For Harry, he taught the Patronus charm, the only defense against Dementors, a spell born of hope and light. Though difficult, Harry learned, summoning silver light from his wand to drive away the shadows of despair. Lupin became more than a teacher. He became a friend, someone who understood Harry's loneliness and offered him guidance without judgment. The year was filled with ordinary joys as well. Quidditch continued, though the presence of Dementors made matches dangerous. Feasts filled the Great Hall, laughter still rang in common rooms, and Hogsmeade weekends gave older students the joy of butterbeer and sweet shops. Yet beneath it all, the shadow of Sirius Black loomed, and every sudden noise, every creak of the castle seemed to carry threat. In the end, the truth unraveled. Sirius Black was not the traitor he had been declared to be. The true betrayer was Peter Pettigrew, who had lived in hiding as Ron Weasley's pet rat. When the truth was revealed beneath the full moon, Harry learned that Sirius had been his parents' friend, his godfather, and that he had spent 12 years in Azkaban for a crime he had not committed. The night ended in chaos, with transformations, duels, and escapes. And though Sirius was freed from Harry's mistrust, he remained hunted by the Ministry. For Hogwarts, the year marked a strange chapter. The Dementors, unwelcome guests, had shown how even the safest place in the wizarding world could be touched by despair. Yet it had also shown that truth, though buried, could be uncovered, and that friendship could endure across years of sorrow. For Harry, the discovery of Sirius gave him something he had never known before: family. The thought that he was not alone, that he had someone who loved him as his parents had, gave him strength he would carry into the years ahead. Hogwarts, with its towers, its shifting staircases, and its endless corridors, had once again been the stage of history. It had withstood another year of fear and revealed another piece of the story that bound Harry Potter to its heart. And though Sirius Black fled into the night on the back of a hippogriff, his shadow and his hope alike remained tied to the castle, where the boy who lived still walked the halls. The year 1994 brought to Hogwarts a spectacle that had not been seen for more than a century. The Triwizard Tournament, long banned for its dangers and tragedies, was revived, and for 1 year the ancient castle became the center of magical Europe once more. Students whispered of it weeks before the official announcement, their excitement filling the corridors, their imaginations filled with images of dragons, mazes, and riddles. When Dumbledore confirmed that Hogwarts would host, the Great Hall roared with noise, banners glowing in enchanted light, the Sorting Hat nodding silently from its shelf as if even it knew history was about to stir again. The arrival of Beauxbaton Academy and Belmstrang Institute transformed the castle into a stage of wonder. Beauxbaton students glided with grace, their pale blue uniforms shimmering in candlelight, their carriage drawn by winged horses that landed with thunder upon the lawns. Durmstrang students arrived by ship, the great vessel rising from the depths of the lake like a beast of the sea, its sails wet with spray, its crew stern and watchful. For many Hogwarts students, it was the first time they had seen so many witches and wizards from other lands, and the sense of belonging to a larger magical world filled them with awe. The goblet of fire placed in the Great Hall became the heart of the tournament. Its flames burned blue and white, awaiting the names of those brave enough to submit themselves. The age line was drawn around it, yet laughter filled the corridors as students tried and failed to trick the magic. When the time came, the goblet spat out the names of the champions: Victor Krum of Durmstrang, Fleur Delacour of Beauxbaton, Cedric Diggory of Hogwarts. But then, to gasps and shock, a fourth name emerged: Harry Potter. Though Harry had not placed his name in the goblet, the magic bound him to the tournament. Whispers spread like fire. Suspicion fell heavy upon him, and for a time even his closest friend Ron doubted him. Students looked at him with envy, anger, or awe, but Harry felt only the weight of a task he had not chosen. Dumbledore, though calm, grew stern, reminding all that the goblet's decision could not be undone. And so Harry was thrust into a contest meant for older, stronger witches and wizards. The tasks tested not only skill but courage, wit, and heart. The first brought Harry face to face with a dragon, the Hungarian horntail, its wings stretching across the sky, its fire scorching the pitch. With only his broom and his nerve, Harry outflew the beast, seizing the golden egg that hid the clue to the next trial. The second task carried him into the depths of the lake, where merfolk guarded captives tied in silence beneath the water. With gillyweed given to him by Dobby, Harry swam deep, saving not only Ron, his chosen hostage, but also Fleur's sister, unwilling to leave a child in danger. The final task was the maze, its hedges twisting into walls of living magic, filled with creatures and enchantments meant to break the spirit. It was in that maze that tragedy struck. Harry and Cedric reached the cup together, their rivalry softened into respect. They touched it at the same time, believing they would share victory. But the cup was a portkey, twisted into a trap by Voldemort's servant, carried them to a graveyard, where Lord Voldemort himself returned to a body once more. Before Harry's eyes, Cedric Diggory was killed, struck down without thought, and Harry was bound in horror to witness the rebirth of the Dark Lord. Through pain, courage, and the echoes of his parents' love, Harry escaped, clutching Cedric's body, returning to Hogwarts with screams of grief upon his lips. The tournament ended not in celebration but in mourning. Cedric's death hung heavy in the Great Hall, his house united in sorrow, the entire school stunned into silence. The Ministry denied the truth, refusing to believe Voldemort had returned, but Harry's story could not be silenced. Hogwarts once again became the stage of history, no longer the site of games and rivalries, but the first battleground in the new war that was about to begin. The Triwizard Tournament had been meant to unite the schools of Europe in friendship. Instead, it had returned Voldemort to power, and it had scarred Hogwarts with the memory of a student lost too soon. The banners of the houses hung heavy that summer, and the laughter of the feast was gone. The goblet of fire had spoken, and in its flames the shadows of the future had been lit. The return of Lord Voldemort in 1995 marked the beginning of a new and darker era for Hogwarts. What had been a school filled with joy, rivalry, and tradition once again became a fortress caught in the tides of war. Harry's return from the graveyard with Cedric's body shook the castle to its core, yet the Ministry of Magic refused to believe his story. Instead of preparing for the storm that had risen, officials turned their suspicion upon Hogwarts itself, leaving the children of the school to live in a place where truth and lies clashed daily. The next year saw Hogwarts change in ways that students could scarcely have imagined. Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic, feared Dumbledore's growing influence and sought to bring the school under ministry control. Dolores Umbridge, with her pink robes and sweet smile that hid cruelty sharper than any curse, was appointed as defense against the dark arts teacher. At first her lessons seemed harmless, full of theory and rules, but it soon became clear that she would not allow students to practice real defense. She forbade them to raise their wands, insisting that Voldemort had not returned, that there was no need for such training. Her reign grew harsher with each week. She punished students with quills that cut their words into their skin, leaving scars in Harry's hand that would never fully fade. She banned clubs, censored speech, and even dared to challenge Dumbledore himself. Her portraits and inquisitorial squad patrolled the corridors, turning Hogwarts into something it had never been before, not a refuge but a place of fear. Yet even under her rule, resistance grew. It was in that darkness that Dumbledore's army was born. In the secret room that appeared when it was needed, the Room of Requirement, Harry, Hermione, and Ron gathered students who refused to remain unprepared. They practiced spells together, shield charms, disarming curses, patronuses that drove away shadows. In that hidden chamber, children became defenders, laughter mixing with determination as they trained for a war their elders did not. For many, It was the first time they felt true strength, the first time they realized that courage was not only a word but something they could live. Outside the school, Voldemort gathered power. His Death Eaters returned to him, spreading fear across villages, breaking into the Ministry, striking wherever they could. The world grew darker with each passing season, and the Ministry's lies cracked at last, when the truth could no longer be denied. By the end of Harry's 5th year, battle had reached the heart of the Ministry itself, and the prophecy that bound Harry and Voldemort together was revealed. The Second Wizarding War had begun in earnest. Hogwarts stood at the center of it all. Students returned each September to find the castle more tense, more guarded. Its wards strengthened, its professors watchful. Hagrid spoke in whispers of giants joining Voldemort. Financy the Centaur taught divination in place of Trelawney, and every class seemed weighed with the knowledge that what they learned might soon save their lives. Even Quidditch, though still played, carried less joy, the cheers of the crowds muted by the fear that hung in the air. In 1996, tragedy struck within the very walls. Draco Malfoy, a boy of Slytherin, was tasked with a mission by Voldemort to kill Albus Dumbledore. The task was too great for him, yet he struggled under its weight, torn between fear and pride. That year, Death Eaters entered Hogwarts through a vanishing cabinet, and the castle became a battlefield. In the end, it was Severus Snape, bound by promises made long before, who struck the fatal blow. Dumbledore fell from the astronomy tower, his body broken beneath the stars, and the castle mourned more deeply than ever before. With Dumbledore's death, Hogwarts entered its darkest year. The Ministry fell to Voldemort, and the school was placed under the control of Death Eaters. Severus Snape became headmaster, though his role was far more complex than it seemed. Caro's siblings, cruel and merciless, taught the children lessons in pain, forcing them to practice curses, punishing those who resisted. The corridors became places of dread, and the laughter of earlier years vanished. Yet even then, resistance endured. Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley, and Luna Lovegood kept alive the spirit of Dumbledore's army. They defied the Carrows, offered protection to younger students, and turned the Room of Requirement into a sanctuary for those in danger. Hogwarts, though chained by fear, never surrendered its heart. The courage of its children burned quietly, waiting for the day when it would blaze again. The Second Wizarding War had begun, and Hogwarts, as it had in every great conflict of the wizarding world, stood both as a target and as a beacon. Its stones remembered the founders, its portraits whispered of ages past, its ghosts drifted with watchful sorrow. It was no longer just a school, it was once again a battleground, waiting for the final storm. The spring of 1998 brought the storm that had long been building. For years, the castle had endured shadows and whispers, watched students grow under the weight of fear, and sheltered resistance in hidden rooms. At last, the war came not in whispers but in thunder, and Hogwarts became once more a battlefield. The final clash of the Second Wizarding War would be fought in its corridors, on its lawns, and beneath its towers, a battle that would decide not only the fate of the school but the fate of the entire wizarding world. The call went out when Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger returned to the castle in search of the final Horcruxes. The word spread swiftly, carried by the portraits, by the ghosts, by the very magic of the castle itself. Students, teachers, and allies gathered, the Room of Requirement swelling with voices of defiance. Members of the Order of the Phoenix arrived, families came to fight, and Hogwarts filled with those willing to stand against Voldemort. The lamps of the Great Hall glowed with determination, and banners of the houses hung heavy, their rivalries forgotten in the face of war. The castle prepared itself as it had in ages past, Wards rose around its walls, towers bristled with enchantments, statues and suits of armor sprang to life, their stone and steel moving with purpose. Teachers led students in defensive spells, shields were raised, traps laid in corridors, and the ghosts drifted solemnly, ready to witness what would come. Even Peeves, long a spirit of mischief, sharpened his tricks into weapons, ready to hurl chaos at the invaders. The castle was no longer only stone. It was alive with the memory of centuries, standing as it had always been meant to, a refuge and a fortress. When Voldemort's army arrived, the night split with fire. Death Eaters swarmed the gates. Giants thundered across the grounds. Acromantulas spilled from the forbidden forest. The air shook with curses, the sky lit with green and red light, and the sounds of battle echoed against the lake. Within the castle, duels raged in every corridor. Professors fought beside students, portraits shouted warnings, and ghosts glided through walls, carrying news from one wing to another. It was chaos, and yet also unity. The houses standing together as one. Heroes rose in those hours. Neville Longbottom, once shy and uncertain, led the resistance with courage, wielding the sword of Gryffindor when it appeared to him in the final moments. He struck down Nagini, Voldemort's serpent and last Horcrux, with a blow that shook the war itself. Molly Weasley faced Bellatrix Lestrange in a duel that ended with the fall of the cruelest of Voldemort's followers. Fred Weasley fought with laughter still upon his lips, and his death left a wound in the castle deeper than stone could bear. Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks fell too, leaving behind their newborn son, a reminder that even victory demanded sacrifice. The Great Hall, once the site of feasts and laughter, became the heart of grief and defiance. Bodies were laid upon its floor, friends wept over fallen comrades, and yet even in mourning, the spirit of resistance did not falter. For every loss, another rose to fight, and Hogwarts, though scarred, stood unbroken. In the final hour, Harry faced Voldemort not in hidden chambers, but before all. He revealed the truth of the Elder Wand, the betrayal of Snape's death, and the folly of seeking power without love. When the curse was cast once more, it rebounded again, and Voldemort fell, his body lifeless, his shadow finally ended. Silence followed, heavy and stunned, and then the hall erupted, not with cheers at first, but with relief, with sobs, with the knowledge that the war was done. The Battle of Hogwarts left the castle scarred. Walls crumbled, towers cracked, fires burned long into the morning. Yet the heart of the school endured. Its stones had seen centuries of joy and sorrow, and now they had seen the fall of the darkest wizard of the age. The castle would be rebuilt, its halls repaired, but the memory of that night would never fade. For Hogwarts had been more than the stage of the final battle. It had been the reason for it, the symbol of unity, the place where children of every house, every background, had stood together against darkness. The lamps of dawn lit the battered castle, and though the scars were many, the spirit of Hogwarts shone brighter than ever. The war was over, and the school had endured. When the echoes of battle faded, and the dust of fallen stone settled, the dawn of a new age rose over the scarred towers of Hogwarts. The Second Wizarding War had ended. Voldemort was gone, and the castle that had stood for nearly 1,000 years remained. Though wounded, its walls bore cracks, its windows shattered, its courtyards marked with scorch and rubble. Yet even in ruin, it stood as it always had, a place where hope outlived fear. The work of rebuilding began at once. Wizards and witches from across Britain came to lend their hands. Professors led their students in charms of repair, bricks rising into place, glass reknitting itself into windows, beams sliding back into towers with the groan of ancient wood. The Great Hall, once the chamber of mourning, became the chamber of renewal, its ceiling alive with stars as feasts returned, first modest, then abundant, until laughter once more filled the air. The castle, though scarred, was alive, and its people gave it strength. For many, the return to daily life was not simple. The losses of the battle were heavy. Fred Weasley's absence left silence where once there had been laughter. Lupin and Tonks, fallen side by side, left behind their son, a child too young to know the weight of sacrifice. Students mourned friends who had never made it to graduation. Families grieved children who had never come home. The scars upon hearts were deeper than any upon stone. Yet Hogwarts had always been a place where sorrow and joy walked together. And now, more than ever, its halls carried both. Dumbledore, though gone, was remembered in every corner of the castle. His portrait, hanging in the headmaster's office, watched with kind eyes, guiding those who came to him with questions. His legacy was felt in the laughter of students, in the courage of teachers, in the unity that had carried the school through the darkest of nights. Where once his voice had spoken warnings, now his silence seemed to promise that the school would endure as it had endured through every age. The Sorting Hat, patched and singed, sang again when September came, its voice a little rough but steady. It spoke not of division, but of unity, reminding every child that courage, wit, loyalty, and ambition were not rivals but companions, each needed, each vital. For the first time in years, its words were greeted not with whispers of fear, but with cheers of hope. Hogwarts entered a new era. Students who had fought in the battle returned to finish their studies, younger children too young to understand the war, but old enough to feel its shadow, arrived with wide eyes and trembling hands. Professors, weary yet proud, guided them with patience, ensuring that lessons were filled not only with magic, but with compassion. The castle, alive with portraits, ghosts, and memories, once again became a place where children laughed in corridors, where owls swept through dawn skies, where feasts filled tables beneath enchanted ceilings. The legacy of Hogwarts grew larger than ever. It had always been the heart of magical Britain, but now it was also the symbol of survival, the proof that unity could overcome darkness. Parents who had once feared to send their children now did so with pride, knowing that the castle was not only safe but sacred. Generations would tell the story of the Battle of Hogwarts, of the night when students, teachers, and families stood side by side and triumphed. And so the castle continued. Its staircases still shifted, its portraits still argued, its poltergeist still hurled tricks from rafters, its ghosts still whispered old tales. Quidditch returned to the pitch, brooms soaring into bright skies, cheers rolling across the grounds. Christmas trees rose again in the Great Hall. Halloween feasts glowed with pumpkins, and exams filled students with the same mix of dread and determination as they always had. Hogwarts, more than stone, more than spell, more than history, lived on. It was a place where children of magic found belonging, where courage was nurtured, where knowledge was cherished, where loyalty was rewarded, where ambition was sharpened. It was a place that remembered every laugh, every tear, every triumph, every sacrifice. Its walls carried the voices of the past, and its towers pointed toward the future. The war had ended, but the story of Hogwarts never truly ends. For as long as there are children born with magic in their blood, as long as there are professors ready to teach, as long as there are owls carrying letters to astonished 11-year-olds, the castle will stand. Its lamps will burn in the windows at night, guiding every child home, and its legacy will endure, not only in the books of history, but in the hearts of all who have ever called it their home.